Chapter 1408 Gold Divine Ape. Chapter 1408 Gold Divine Ape. 3 Strongest Sword Principle? Isn't that the same as me? Jian Wushuang was shocked. He became Universe God because he had merged 3 strongest sword principles. Hence, his explosion of divine power was stronger by 100 times than those at the same rank. Although Ling Feibai wasn't an inverse cultivator, if he were to really become Universe God because he merged 3 strongest sword principle, his explosion of divine power would still be dozens of times stronger than those at the same rank. In other words, as a Universe God in the 2nd heaven, he could be evenly matched with an advanced Universe God in the 3rd heaven in terms of the explosion of divine power. On top of that, including the secret skill that he had cultivated, treasures that he possessed, and unique skill that he had created. No wonder he could be evenly matched with a peak Universe God in the 3rd heaven 1,000 years ago. Now that 1,000 years had passed, he must be even stronger. Jian Wushuang was shocked. With such a strong power, it seems that if I don't perform any tricks, I might not even qualify to be his opponent. I'd better give it my all. Jian Wushuang's eyes were twinkling with brightness. A tremendous momentum of soul power surged the very next moment. The level of soul power was much higher than when he pulled off soul attack earlier. Vroom vroom vroom. His soul power churned in madness and it became a huge, gold divine ape that was more than 300 meters tall before all the disciples. There was golden light spurting out from the divine ape's eyes. The moment it appeared, it bellowed in anger. Its roar shook heaven and earth and its imposing force spread in all directions. Suddenly, the universe changed color. Outside of Titanic Star, the disciples who were watching the battle noticed the power that the gold divine ape gave out. They looked frightened. Above the boundless Milky Way, the deacon elderlies too were shocked. That's divine ape? First, black tortoise. Then demonic dragon. Now, even the strongest divine ape appeared. Could the manipulation method of consciousness that Jian Wushuang cultivated be 5-beast soul manipulation knack? Yes, definitely. Black tortoise, demonic dragon and divine ape are exactly the same. As for purple tiger and crimson phoenix, he has never performed it yet. This young man possesses such a profound manipulation method of soul. Those deacon elderlies were experienced. Previously, when there was only demonic dragon and black tortoise, they let it be. Then, when the divine ape appeared, they immediately recognized the origin of the 5-beast soul manipulation knack. Of course, they could recognize that, but they couldn't tell that Jian Wushuang had been using soul power, not consciousness. The 5-beast soul manipulation knack, I gave it to him, Hall Master Yuan suddenly said. The surrounding deacon elderlies looked towards Hall Master Yuan. This young man is very good at consciousness attacks. However, he was inexperienced in the manipulation of consciousness. So I told Lei Chao to get the 5-beast soul manipulation knack for him. Of course, I didn't just give it to him. He paid a huge price for it. Hall Master Yuan smiled. The price that he was referring to was actually the fact that Jian Wushuang had had to pretend to be a universe god in the 2nd heaven and received unfair treatment in Lineage of Star. Hearing Hall Master Yuan's explanation, the deacon elderlies understood. To be able to perform divine ape not only represents that Jian Wushuang's consciousness has reached the level of a peak universe god in the 3rd heaven, but it also meant that he already reached the level of great achievement in the mastery of 5-beast soul manipulation knack. Now that divine ape is out, he could definitely be evenly matched with a peak universe god in the 3rd heaven in terms of power. From what it seems, it won't be too easy for Ling Feibai to win 1st place in this rotation battle, a deacon elderly sighed. On Titanic Star, the gold divine ape that was 300 meters tall appeared in the universe while Jian Wushuang stood right in the middle of the gold divine ape with his faint gold eyes. He fixed his gaze at Ling Baifei before him. There was a surge of murderous intention that soared up. This is fun. There was a flash of light twinkling in Ling Feibai's eyes too. The very next moment, he moved and appeared before the gold divine ape. He wielded the purple soft sword in his hand. A ray of purple sword light shot out, and the power and size continuously increased during the process when it swept across the void. It finally reached the gold divine ape. Looking at the approaching purple sword light, Jian Wushuang, who was in the gold divine ape, held Blood Mountain sword and swung. Along with the swing, there was a gold sword that appeared in the gold divine ape's hand. It then imitated Jian Wushuang's action. Bang! A terrifying gold sword light collided with the long purple sword shadow. After a shocking clash, the two sword lights dispersed. Oh! Ling Feibai raised his eyebrows and smirked. Not bad. In terms of power, it's not weaker than a peak universe god in the third heaven that I once fought. I wonder how the other aspects are too. Swoosh! Ling Feibai plunged forward. As he was charging forward, a boundless purple mist began spreading. Meteor shower. Wah! In the purple mist, the rays of purple sword light were like meteorites. They showered down towards the gold divine ape's body. So fast! Jian Wushuang revealed a face of terror, and he quickly waved his sword to block the purple sword light. However, it was impossible for the gold divine ape's huge body to block off those fine meteor-like purple sword light. It most likely only blocked 1/3 of them. The rest of the 2/3 of the sword lights hit the gold divine ape's huge body, unfiltered. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Some parts of the divine ape's body were pierced by purple sword lights, and there were holes all over. However, these holes were filled back instantly by soul power. Hence, the gold divine ape wasn't affected at all. A divine ape formed by consciousness. Even when it was pierced, it could recover immediately. Ling Feibai squinted his eyes and then smiled. How about this then? Swoosh! Ling Feibai's body suddenly moved and appeared by the side of the gold divine ape. He swung his purple soft sword. The sword light wasn't hindered and instantly penetrated the gold divine ape's throat. The gold divine ape's huge skull then flew off. However, although the gold divine ape was cut off, it was only a short while before it recovered. The skull could be recovered too. Ling Feibai creased his eyebrows, then he quickly loosened them again. Although it could be recovered, it would require an enormous amount of consciousness. Although your consciousness is strong, how long could you stand for if you kept using it? Ling Feibai's voice spread, and Jian Wushuang, who was in the gold divine ape, suddenly felt strange. Chapter 1409, Jian Wushuang did all he could. Chapter 1409, Jian Wushuang did all he could. On the Titanic star. Whiz. The ghostly figure of Ling Feibai shuttled through the void, and his existence could not be seen easily. Jian Wushuang could barely detect Ling Feibai's fast movements with his soul power. It was so fast that Jian Wushuang couldn't spare more effort to deal with Ling Feibai's further attack. Ling Feibai, while shuttling through the void, continued to operate his swordsmanship to penetrate the golden divine ape generated by Jian Wushuang or cut the ape's arms or head. Although Jian Wushuang could immediately restore the golden god ape with his soul power, it really exhausted his energy. I have to find a way to limit his power. Jian Wushuang blinked his eyes, turned his palms, and generated his blaze quicksand gourd. The quicksand of the gourd rushed out immediately. In an instant, the sand covered the whole vast Titanic star, surrounding Ling Feibai and causing great difficulties to him. You want to limit my power with only this? Ling Feibai grinned. More than that. Jian Wushuang shouted with a loud cry as a huge, scarlet fire burst out around his divine body, forming a scarlet sea of fire in a vast area around him. He now dominated the sea. Scarlet Kingdom, another secret skill. He used the secret skill from the Scarlet Island. At the beginning, he could only perform the first part of the secret skill, with his overall strength improved by 70%. Now he could display the second part. Now with the skill, his overall strength has doubled. Blaze Quicksand Gourd weakened Ling Feibai's power, while Scarlet Kingdom improved Jian Wushuang's. Now, Jian Wushuang's power almost matched his rivals. Seeing this scene, Ling Feibai thought, "You truly have many means, but unfortunately, they are useless." Then Ling Fei generated a large number of waves, covering the entire titanic star. The waves formed a domain and, at the same time, competed with Jian Wushuang's sand domain for dominance. But perhaps Ling Feibai's strength was stronger, Jian Wushuang's sand domain was suppressed and retreated. He also has a domain treasure? Jian Wushuang thought. It was easy to understand. After all, Ling Feibai was the genius in the lineage of Star for so many years. It was normal to get some treasures after numerous adventures. Without the suppression of Jian Wushuang quicksand, Ling Feibai's power exploded, making Jian Wushuang feel pain and exhausting his soul power at an astonishing speed. The exertion of the ape alone has made my soul's strength extremely low. Now the Ling Feibai dependence is constantly harming the ape, and I have to constantly repair it. This consumes more of the soul's strength. It won't take long for my soul's strength to be exhausted. In every battle, participants always had a certain time to restore their divine power and soul power, and Jian Wushuang had also remaining at his peak. Nevertheless, with his current soul power, he could not use the divine ape for too long. I have to spare no effort before the power is exhausted. It would be good if I could defeat Ling Feibai. If not, I will give in. Jian Wushuang had already made the decision. He used his final skill, a black, mysterious spear. It was this peculiar spear that helped him kill Bei Xiu. The god-killing spear. Consciousness attacks treasures. And it seems that it is a high-level treasure. Deacons found it how remarkable the treasure was. Ling Feibai, you have to be careful. Jian Wushuang kindly reminded him, and then the dark, mysterious spear slowly floated up, appearing in the hands of the golden divine ape, whose power exploded. Ling Feibai was a little surprised. With my remaining soul power and divine power, I can still make 2 attacks. There you go. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands and a flash of light burst out. Secret skill of Tian Yuan. Bang! The first part, the secret skill of Tian Yuan, was inextinguishable light. And the second, eternal light. He hadn't been able to use the eternal light until his power reached the peak of a universe god in the 3rd heaven after cultivation for 800 years. Eternal light was 100 times stronger than inextinguishable light. And while the eternal light burst out, the golden ape, 100 feet tall, let out its power with a roar. Then, as the ape threw the god-killing spear in his hand directly, the eternal light instantly integrated into the spear. The eternal light got even more power when it was integrated with the spear. Feeling alarmed, Ling Feibai waved his purple sword. Sunset firmament. Boom! The disciples who had been watching the battle were all astonished by the great power. The deacons could recognize that the skill was a rank 3 unique skill. Lei Feibai's sword and Jian Wushuang's spear collided with each other. Bang! The spear blasted out and the golden divine ape also nearly broke down. The eternal light of the spear also went into the consciousness sea in Ling Feibai's divine body. His face went pale. As for Jian Wushuang, without the protection of the golden divine ape or the black tortoise, he was directly blasted out. Chapter 1410 Victory or Defeat. Chapter 1410 Victory or Defeat. Huh! Ling Feibai lifted his head and happened to see the crimson sun twinkling in Jian Wushuang's eyes that was charging towards him. Dreamland again. I told you it won't affect me. Ling Feibai roared and his fierce consciousness charged. He shook off the dreamland instantly. Of course, although he had freed himself from the dreamland, it required some time for it to happen. At that moment, Jian Wushuang's eyes were twinkling with unprecedented light. I knew that it wouldn't be of any harm to you, but as long as it affected you by a slight amount, it would be enough. Jian Wushuang's roar reverberated in the entire Milky Way. Before the surrounding disciples' gazes, Jian Wushuang, who was close to Ling Feibai, gathered the churning divine power in his body all into his right index finger. The very next moment, the index finger that had gathered boundless divine power spurted gold brilliant light. 4th finger of ancient god, God's test. Rumble. He pointed and the earth shattered. The entire Milky Way darkened. Among the boundless darkness, a huge bronze finger that seemed to extend over from the remote ages appeared. The huge bronze finger brought about an imposing force that could destroy the world. When it appeared, every disciple's face grew pale. Even the deacon elderlies among the Milky Way were shocked by the sight. Bloodline power. Jian Wushuang has such a strong bloodline. This kind of bloodline should be an ancient god's bloodline, right? Ancient God was definitely the utmost supreme bloodline in eternal chaotic world. The ferocity of ancient God was well understood by the deacon elderlies. Then, Jian Wushuang relied on his ancient god power to put his ancient god unique skill into full play, which was the fourth finger of ancient god. He had acquired the technique of the fourth finger after he had become a universe god in the first heaven and awakened again to inherit the memory. Only ancient gods above 5-star were qualified to perform that technique. Even Jian Wushuang barely performed it. However, he amazed the world with the single feat. Rumble. The bronze huge finger charged towards Ling Feibai. A terrifying manner suppressed the air and Ling Feibai was shocked. He had just freed himself from Jian Wushuang's dreamland and he had to deal with such a terrifying technique. Naturally, he was slightly slow in response. He couldn't dodge in time, but he immediately performed a sword principle to break the huge bronze finger apart. Wah! The eye-catching sword light suddenly erupted. Ling Baifei couldn't perform his unique skill in time and he only swung his sword. It gave out great power, especially a tearing power. Bang! The huge bronze finger collided with the sword light. A loud thud came along with pist. An enormous amount of divine power crushed and crashed. The eye-catching sword light wanted to tear down the huge bronze finger. However, Ling Feibai belittled the power of the fourth finger of ancient god. As it was a supreme unique skill of an ancient god, even though Jian Wushuang concentrated the ancient god power all over his body, he was only just able to perform the technique. If Ling Feibai could perform his unique skill, he would be able to resist or even tear off the huge finger. However, a random swing wouldn't be able to resist the huge bronze finger, let alone to tear it apart. The huge bronze finger gave out strong power and collapsed the sword light like breaking a piece of dead wood. Then, the huge finger covered Ling Feibai's body directly. No, Ling Feibai was frightened. Bang! The earth-shattering rumble was heard across Titanic Star and also the Milky Way. The huge bronze finger erupted its power entirely and formed a bronze divine storm while Ling Feibai drowned in it. It ended. Ling Feibai, did he lose? At the border of Titanic Star, the disciples were shocked at the sight. Jian Wushuang stood in the void panting, but his gaze was fixed on the inner part of the divine storm. Just then, rumble! A scary aura suddenly swept out from the divine storm. The aura was extremely fierce and it broke off from the divine storm easily. What? Jian Wushuang's face changed and was replaced by a bitter smile. The disciples at the border of Titanic Star were in shock. They saw that after the soaring aura had broken the divine storm, a 3-meter-tall purple god which was covered with purple scales and had ferocious features appeared. The purple god held a purple, soft sword in his hand. Although there was a tremendous change in his body, there was no change in his appearance. The purple god was Ling Feibai. Supreme Heaven. Ling Feibai even used Supreme Heaven. It seems like he was cornered. To be able to force Ling Feibai to this stage is very good. The deacon elderlies were chatting on the Milky Way. They knew that what Ling Feibai was going to do would be his strongest trump card. On Titanic Star, Jian Wushuang stood there calmly with a bitter face. Although the purple god that Ling Feibai transformed into had a soaring aura, his facial expression was one of embarrassment. He looked at Jian Wushuang apologetically. Sorry, I got too excited and used this technique subconsciously. Using this technique in the battle is rather unfair to all the disciples, including you. So, consider me a loser for this battle. The disciples heard what Ling Feibai said and they were astonished. Ling Feibai admitted defeat. But he won, no? Jian Wushuang lifted his head and looked at Ling Feibai. I lost and I can only blame myself for not being powerful enough. Plus, according to the rules of the battle, disciples must refrain from consuming elixirs or performing secret skills of Star Palace. But the secret skill that you performed is secret skill of Star Palace. It should be another secret skill from Scripture Depository, right? Yes, the secret skill is called Supreme Heaven, Ling Feibai nodded. I see, Jian Wushuang said calmly, there are 4 secret skills in Scripture Depository. The secret skill of Star Palace is basic. Any disciple of Star Palace could cultivate that. However, the other 3 secret skills would require one to pass through the 3rd floor of Star Tower in order to qualify to cultivate another one. You are able to cultivate Supreme Heaven, and it must mean that you passed through the 3rd floor of Star Tower. You obtained it with your own power. How's that unfair? So, I am the one who lost this battle. Then, Jian Wushuang looked at the deacon elderly who stood not far away and said, Elderly, please announce the result then. The deacon elderly looked at Hall Master Yuan in the Milky Way. He then made the announcement when he saw Hall Master Yuan nod. Ling Feibai is the winner of this battle. Chapter 14:11, A Sudden Change. Chapter 14:11, A Sudden Change. The deacon announced the results of the battle that Ling Feibai had won. This result, originally within the public's expectations, wouldn't be surprising to the many disciples who had watched the battle. But the result caused a stir. Many disciples began to talk about it. Ling Feibai almost lost. He wouldn't have lost the battle if he hadn't used the skills from the Golden Pavilion. Everyone couldn't help exclaiming about Jian Wushuang's power and skills, which had caused great difficulties to Ling Feibai. The Supreme Heaven that Ling Feibai had used was one of the 4 secret skills of the lineage of Star. Only cultivators reaching the 3rd level of the Stat Tower could learn and use it. Now, among the universe gods of the 2nd heaven, only Ling Feibai had reached the 3rd level of the Star Tower. It was reasonable and fair to use it in this battle. Jian Wushuang also admitted that Ling Feibai was indeed stronger than himself. I'm looking forward to battling with you next time. Ling Feibai looked at Jian Wushuang. Me too. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. Jian Wushuang was quite respectful to Ling Feibai after battling with him, especially when Ling Feibai had voluntarily conceded the battle. He decided to challenge Ling Feibai again when he improved his skills later. Jian Wushuang and Ling Feibai became good friends. But at that moment, an astonishingly loud sound suddenly burst out. Boom! An astonishing power of destruction, without any forewarning, spread directly all over the endless galaxy. It was accompanied by a resounding roar. What's happening? What's this? Everyone in the Titanic Star raised his head. Hall Master Yuan and the other deacons also raised their heads to see what was happening. Oh! A brilliant, dazzling thunderstorm suddenly came, shocking everyone. This is a god test? Even Hall Master Yuan Palace was shocked. A god test without any signs? And the attack even penetrated the inherently powerful defense system of our lineage of Star. Everyone was shocked and horrified. The thunderstorm crossed all the barriers and struck one figure. The figure was Jian Wushuang. Boom! The dazzling thunder burst apart over the divine body of Jian Wushuang with a sweeping destructive power. Jian Wushuang stayed unscathed and calm. When the thunder had completely dissipated, Jian Wushuang looked at the sky, feeling surprised. The second god test is coming so early? Unexpectedly fast. Jian Wushuang tightened his hands with worry. In the middle of the galaxy, Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao looked at each other face to face, and they already understood why the thunder had suddenly come. This is a sign of Jian Wushuang's second inverse cultivation god test. The first sign of Jian Wushuang's god test was only a thundercloud. But now the sign of the second test had directly transformed into a thunderstorm. Obviously, the second god test would be way more difficult than the first. At this time, Hall Master Yuan ordered, Jian Wushuang, leave here with me. Everyone else, continue your battles. Then Jian Wushuang left the place with Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao. the disciples and deacons in the Titanic star were confused without knowing what was going on. Is Jian Wushuang's third God test coming? Many disciples speculated, but they knew that it had nothing to do with them, so they soon continued their battles. After a while, Jian Wushuang arrived at the Crystal Palace with Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao. They started to talk about the God test. Jian Wushuang, the sacred thunder should be the sign of your inverse cultivation test. Hall Master Yuan said. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded. Oh my God, the mere sign of your God test equals others' inverse cultivation tests. Hall Master Yuan couldn't help exclaiming. Jian Wushuang, how soon will your inverse cultivation test be? Lei Chao asked. 10 years. Jian Wushuang answered. So soon? Both Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao were shocked. After all, ordinary practitioners had a relatively long period of time to prepare for their God test, at least a few hundreds of years, or even thousands of years. But now, Jian Wushuang only had 10 years to prepare for his second inverse cultivation test. It's too short indeed. Jian Wushuang agreed. Before his first God test, he was given 120 years to prepare, but now there was only 10 years. On that trajectory, Jian Wushuang's third inverse cultivation test would come directly without any preparation time. It's difficult to prepare in only 10 years. Lei Chao frowned. Indeed. The master of Yuandian looked over and said, but, fortunately, since you have an amazing performance in the battle, you can get a bonus. Besides, you have passed the 19th level of the illusionary mind C. According to the rules of our lineage of star, you can go to the scripture depository and choose another secret skill to practice. The second secret skill? Jian Wushuang asked. Among the 4 great secret skills, the most famous were secret skills of Star Palace, which were admired by all the disciples in the lineage of Star. But if you wanted to practice the second secret, you needed to meet certain conditions. You needed to break through the 3rd floor of the Star Tower. But only the one who had passed the 3rd level of the Star Tower could cultivate another secret skill. Only Ling Feibai did. Why was Jian Wushuang also eligible to do so? Apart from passing the 3rd level of the Star Tower, the other condition is for a universe god in the 2nd heaven to pass above the 18th level of the illusionary mind C. As you have passed through the 19th level, you are qualified to practice the second secret skill. Hall Master Yuan said, I intended to tell you about it after you finish the battle, but now it's time to let you know. The preparation time is only 10 years. You should get the second secret skill as soon as possible. Chapter 1412, State of Mind. Chapter 1412, State of Mind. 10 years is really too short. In such a short period of time, even if you picked a suitable secret skill from the scripture depository, you wouldn't have time to cultivate it. Hall Master Yuan creased his eyebrows. The 4 secret skills in Lineage of Star, every single one of them was impressive. If Jian Wushuang were to cultivate the other secret skills under the prerequisite of the secret skill of Star Palace, the possibility of passing the inverse cultivation test would definitely increase tremendously. It was a pity that he didn't have enough time. After all, the stronger the secret skill, the tougher it was to cultivate. Just like the few secret skills in Scripture Depository, no matter how brilliant a genius one was, no one could expect to learn the fundamentals without a dozen years of training. Hence, 10 years wasn't enough. Forget about the secret skills. You can't prepare too many things in 10 years. The most important part is understanding the second inverse cultivation test more and being mentally prepared. That will heighten the possibility of passing, Lei Chao said. You're right, Hall Master Yuan nodded in agreement. If it were just an ordinary cultivator's God's test, they wouldn't need to be so worried over the fact that they only had 10 years to prepare. The most crucial point was that Jian Wushuang was going through an inverse cultivation test. They weren't familiar with inverse cultivation tests. They didn't know what Jian Wushuang would come across during his second inverse cultivation test. The unknown is always the scariest. Jian Wushuang, you've been through your first inverse cultivation test. Tell us what you have been through during your first inverse cultivation test. We shall help to predict, Hall Master Yuan said. Jian Wushuang immediately described his experience of first inverse cultivation briefly. After that, both Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao both looked terrified. The first inverse cultivator test has a total of 9 sacred thunder, and the very last one was a combination of thunder test, fire test, and mind test altogether? Oh my God! The two experts were astonished. Just the very first inverse cultivator test already combined thunder test, fire test, and mind time. I really couldn't imagine what you would come across during your second inverse cultivator test. Hall Master Yuan looked at Jian Wushuang. I can't tell either. Lei Chao shook his head, but he beamed with joy and said, we can't tell because we don't really know much about inverse cultivation. We seldom once see people passing inverse cultivation test. However, the Palace Master is powerful and knowledgeable. Who knows? He might know something about the second inverse cultivation test. Palace Master? Hall Master Yuan too was delighted. Palace Master of Star Palace, the founder of Lineage of Star, the supreme expert on the top of the pyramid in eternal chaotic world, was an ancient existence who had lived for God knows how long. Such a supreme expert must know more about inverse cultivation than they did. Let me ask Palace Master now. Hall Master Yuan immediately sent an inquiry through the communication token. Soon there was a reply. The Palace Master said that the inverse cultivators are the most unique existences in the eternal chaotic world. It is too rare in the eternal chaotic world. Even he didn't know much about the inverse cultivation test. However, he once talked to another Almighty many years back. The Almighty brought up inverse cultivation and also the inverse cultivation test. The second inverse cultivation test seems to focus not on the power but on mind. Hall Master Yuan said, Mind? State of mind? Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted. Isn't it like a mind test then? Lei Chao looked over. Different. Hall Master Yuan shook his head. It's another test aimed at one's mind. However, inverse cultivation tests are much scarier than mind tests. Jian Wushuang looked solemn. State of mind? State of mind and consciousness, they were entirely different. The strength of consciousness constantly improved along with the improvement of cultivator's power. However, state of mind would only improve continuously through life encounters. Some had it smooth sailing all their lives until they reached the top. Even if they were extremely powerful, their state of mind might not be strong. But some people were very weak in strength. Their state of mind was extremely strong, as they'd been through many tough experiences. Jian Wushuang belonged to the latter group. Ever since he had risen up from the ancient world, he encountered countless frustrations and hardships. He struggled again and again on the verge of life and death. Through such situations, he had been strengthened. His heart was so firm and tenacious that it was never shaken. However, he was dealing with an inverse cultivation test after all. He couldn't be definite that his state of mind could pass through the inverse cultivation test. As we know that the second inverse cultivation test focuses on state of mind. We will figure some methods out over the next few training years. Hall Master Yuan squinted and continued. In eternal chaotic world, there are many mystery lands and unique places that could give good training to one's state of mind. You only have 10 years. You don't have to go to those mystery lands, but you can try in this one place. Where? Jian Wushuang looked. Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Hall Master Yuan replied. Dark Phoenix Pavilion is second to Lineage of Star in Starland. There are many experts and even real god experts. The one thing lacking was that they didn't have an Almighty in charge. In Dark Phoenix Pavilion, there's a training ground called Mind Cliff. It focuses on training state of mind. It is quite famous on Starland, even throughout the entire Purple Moon Sanctuary. If you were to train for a few years on Mind Cliff, it should be helpful to you. Mind Cliff. Jian Wushuang nodded. Lineage of Star has always been revered by Dark Phoenix Pavilion. If I were to talk to their pavilion master personally and send some treasures over, it shouldn't be a problem for you to train for a few years on Mind Cliff, Hall Master Yuan said. If so, sorry for the trouble, Hall Master Yuan. Jian Wushuang expressed his gratitude. No big deal. Plus, You performed well in the battle. Theoretically, you should be granted many things. These are just extras. Consider it the price to pay for Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Hall Master Yuan smiled and instructed again, Lei Chao, you will bring this young man to Dark Phoenix Pavilion personally then. All right, Lei Chao nodded. During the years you are in Dark Phoenix Pavilion, I'll have people clear up Firmament World as a place for you to pass through your inverse cultivation test, Hall Master Yuan said. Firmament World was an independent space. There were no cultivators or living things in it. Although Lineage of Star controlled the world, it was useless normally. If it were to be used as a venue to pass through an inverse cultivation test, it'd be the best option. It was a place cut off from external worlds. Regardless of how great the power and movement Jian Wushuang's inverse cultivation test was, no one would notice. Go ahead. Hall Master Yuan waved. Soon, Jian Wushuang headed to the Dark Phoenix Pavilion with Lei Chao. Chapter 1413, Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Chapter 1413, Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Dark Phoenix Pavilion was well known in the Starland. The majority of disciples there were female and only a tiny fraction were male. Jian Wushuang and Lei Chao spent only a few days going through the wormhole before they arrived at the gate of the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Although Dark Phoenix Pavilion couldn't rival the incomparable majesty of the Lineage of Star, it was also boundless and occupied a huge mountain range. Go and tell your master that we've arrived. Lei Chao said coldly to a guard here. Please wait a moment, my lord. The guard disciple immediately went to inform his master. After just a moment, a graceful woman in purple surrounded by a large number of figures came from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Lei Chao, long time no see. The woman stopped in front of Lei Chao and looked straight at him. Hello, Su Ro. Lei Chao also responded. Obviously, they had known each other for a long time. A few days ago, I received a message from Hall Master Yuan. I knew that there would be a real god in the stars and a disciple coming to visit my pavilion. But I didn't expect you to come. So, you seem to value this little guy a lot, huh? The woman looked at Jian Wushuang with great interest. Now you know where I'm coming from. Just take us to the Mind Cliff. Lei Chao said indifferently. Don't hurry. Su Ro raised his eyebrows and at the same time turned around, saying, Come with me. Lei Chao followed Su Ro and others to the Mind Cliff immediately. On the way to the Mind Cliff. Lei Chao, is Su Ro your friend or something? Jian Wushuang asked. Lei Chao nodded slightly. She is the master of Dark Phoenix Pavilion and also a real god. We've made several acquaintances. Okay, Jian Wushuang said. And then Su Ro, who was leading the way ahead, suddenly turned around and asked Jian Wushuang, What's your name? Jian Wushuang. He answered politely. Disciples of the Star Palace? Asked Su Ro. Yes. Oh good. I've long heard that all the disciples in Star Palace are extremely gifted. In my Dark Phoenix Pavilion there are also many disciples, but they are too proud and always at odds with each other. It brings me a lot of pressure. Now that you are a disciple from the Star Palace, you can help me deal with them and give them a lesson. She smiled softly. Su Ro, we have no time to help you. Lei Chao said. It won't take too long. If he helps me, I can provide me a place in the Mind Cliff for free in return. How about that? Su Ro smiled. Jian Wushuang didn't know how to respond. Before he replied, Su Ro tried to persuade him. Come with me, my disciples can't wait to see you. She sped up. Jian Wushuang looked at Lei Chao for help. Lei Chao frowned and whispered, Jian Wushuang, I owed her a favor, and this is Dark Phoenix Pavilion, I can't refuse her. Just follow her. It won't take long. Fine. Jian Wushuang followed Su Ro. Soon, they arrived at a battlefield. This was the place where the Dark Phoenix Pavilion held battles on weekdays. Now the battlefield was crowded with disciples from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. A few days ago when Su Ro had received a message from Hall Master Yuan, she had informed all her disciples of the coming of Jian Wushuang. Many disciples seemed very excited. For disciples from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion, The lineage of Star was the absolute hegemony in the Starland, with numerous admirable talents. Top geniuses of the Dark Phoenix Pavilion would only be normal disciples in the lineage of Star. And the best disciples of the Star Palace were the top of the top. So many disciples in the Dark Phoenix Pavilion were curious about those from the Starland and even envied them. Those envying disciples thought that they were actually not inferior to disciples from the Starland. So, hearing Jian Wushuang coming, everyone was eager to have a look. When Su Rou and Jian Wushuang arrived, disciples waiting in the battlefield got excited. Here comes the disciple of the Star Palace. He looks just mediocre. It's difficult to distinguish one's power simply by his breath or appearance. As a disciple from the Starland, he must be excellent. Many disciples were having a heated discussion about Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang could feel many beady eyes looking at him. Strong aggressiveness, Jian Wushuang thought. All right, be quiet. Su Rou started to speak. Her voice was very plain and soft, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of every disciple in the battlefield. Everyone in the battlefield immediately went quiet. I would like to introduce to you this disciple of the Star Palace, Jian Wushuang. It is a very rare opportunity to meet him in our Dark Phoenix Pavilion. You should cherish the chance. Su Rou smiled softly. As soon as she spoke, many of the disciples immediately got excited and aggressive. Su Rou is encouraging her disciples to challenge me? Jian Wushuang frowned. Lei Chao decided to say something. It's unfair to us. We are just guests who want to go to the Mind Cliff. Unfair? Su Rou questioned. Was it fair that you left me alone? What I am doing to your disciple is nothing compared with what you did to me. Lei Chao looked embarrassed. Su Rou sneered. I have always been in awe of the stars in Dark Phoenix Pavilion and absolutely daren't cause difficulties for disciples the lineage of Star. But this time is different. It's you that brought him there. I just want to challenge you, Lei Chao. Su Rou said. Chapter 1414 Challenge. Chapter 1414 Challenge. Hearing what Su Rou said, Lei Chao turned pale with rage. The surrounding experts from Dark Phoenix Pavilion looked strange. They had known since long ago about the ambiguous relationship between their pavilion master and Lei Chao. Hence, they wasn't surprised by Su Rou's action. Soon, Lei Chao let out a sigh and looked at Jian Wushuang again. Jian Wushuang, go ahead and exchange some experiences with the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion. All right, Jian Wushuang nodded. As Jian Wushuang agreed, the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion on the training ground beamed with joy. The few that had wanted to launch an attack long ago immediately came forward. Jian Wushuang, core disciple of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Lu Shar, want to challenge you. I've heard that the disciple of Star Palace from lineage of Star are all gifted and they are all monstrous. I finally get to see it with my own eyes. Fight with me. Jian Wushuang, let me challenge you. I'd like to see how strong the disciple of Star Palace is. In the noise, there were almost a dozen disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion who stood out. Those disciples had soaring fighting intentions. They were dying to fight Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. There's too many of you. If I were to take every single challenge, God knows how long it would take. As you are all from the same sect, you should know one another's power well. Why not pick 3 of your strongest to fight me? Jian Wushuang said swiftly. Hearing what Jian Wushuang had said, the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion quickly agreed. In a short while, 3 people appeared before Jian Wushuang. All 3 of them were female. Jian Wushuang, I'm Lu Shar. I'm at the 3rd place among the universe gods in the 2nd heaven in Dark Phoenix Pavilion. I'll fight against you first. The maiden in a red robe named Lu Shar held a long whip as she stared at Jian Wushuang. Let's begin. Jian Wushuang looked solemn as he thought. As they are coming at me because of my identity as a disciple of Star Palace, I can lose the names of the disciple of Star Palace. I shall put the Dreamland technique to work straight away and take care of them straightforwardly. Jian Wushuang had made up his mind. Very soon, Lu Shar took action. The long whip in her hand suddenly transformed into a huge green dragon. The huge dragon gave out a strong power and charged toward Jian Wushuang. Before the disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Jian Wushuang didn't move an inch, nor did he take out his blood mountain sword. But there was a flash of crimson light that erupted in his eyes. The crimson light was like a crimson sun, extremely eye-catching. Everyone was attracted by the crimson sun uncontrollably. Ah! Lu Shar screamed in pain and she went pale in agony. However, Jian Wushuang let out a sigh leisurely and dotted Lu Shar's forehead with his fingertip. He then dismissed the dreamland. Without the influence of dreamland, Lu Shar had her consciousness recovered, but she realized that Jian Wushuang's finger was on her forehead. If Jian Wushuang were using a sword instead of his finger, she'd be dead. How could this be? Lu Shar looked like she was in disbelief. She couldn't accept what had happened. You lost. Jian Wushuang said softly and turned to leave. Lu Shar looked lost, but the very next movement, she clenched her fist and looked at Jian Wushuang in his eyes as she stepped back. The sight stirred up a commotion among the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion surrounding the training field. Senior Lu Shar was defeated so easily. It's dreamland. Senior Lu Shar just drowned into phantasmagoria. Such a terrifying phantasmagoria. The disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion were astonished. He had lived up to his name as a disciple of Star Palace. He defeated Lu Shar, who was at the 3rd place in Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Lei Chao, your disciple in Lineage of Star, has a really strong consciousness. His phantasmagoria seems impressive. Su Ro stole a glance at Lei Chao. He's not only good at this. However, the geniuses in Dark Phoenix Pavilion shouldn't be able to force him to put in his full effort, Lei Chao said. Oh yeah. Su Ro sneered. Then, the genius disciple on the 2nd place took a stand. It's a pity that the disciple was around Lu Shar's standard. Her only advantage over Lu Shar was that she knew that Jian Wushuang was good at consciousness attacks and phantasmagoria, so she took preventative measures. Even though she was prepared, she couldn't resist Jian Wushuang's phantasmagoria. The two geniuses were defeated in an instant. Her defeated outcome was the same as Lu Shar. Of the strongest 3 from Dark Phoenix Pavilion, 2 were defeated in the blink of an eye. The last was a beautiful lady in black with a cold aura. There was a murderous manner in the beautiful lady's eyes. Linger, give your all. Don't embarrass your master, Su Ro spoke. Master? How dare you take a disciple of your own? Lei Chao looked at Su Ro in shock. But, can't I? Su Ro laughed. Lei Chao shrugged and remained silent. Jian Wushuang looked at the girl in black before him. He could feel that the girl in black was much stronger than the 2 previous girls. Come on, Jian Wushuang's voice was cold. As you wish. The girl in black didn't hesitate. She moved her wrist and a black long spear appeared in her hand. Her figure moved and she appeared before Jian Wushuang in an instant. Swoosh! The black long spear went through the void and flew towards Jian Wushuang. So fast! Jian Wushuang was surprised. Amongst universe gods in the 2nd heaven, the only person who used a spear like this was Long Fei Bai. He was only slightly faster than this girl in black, just slightly. Virum. The boundless soul power swept out and suddenly Jian Wushuang had created a huge black tortoise. He blocked the girl in black's attack with the tortoise shell while he quickly lifted his head to put 18 Azura Hell's secret skill to play. One would not be able to resist if he or she didn't have a certain level of consciousness strength. The terrifying effect of dreamland surged around them and the girl in black looked shocked. However, she recovered very quickly and the black long spear in her hand never paused. She blocked it so easily? Jian Wushuang looked surprised. Bang! The black long spear hit the black tortoise shell and a fierce power erupted. It shook the black tortoise vigorously. Kacha kacha. There were a few fine cracks on the surface of the black tortoise and the very next moment, it exploded. Broke my black tortoise defense with one stab? Jian Wushuang was surprised and he didn't dare to drag on the match for any longer. A sudden boundless soul power soared. Roar! Along with the earth-shattering roar, a gold divine ape that was more than 300 meters tall and had a soaring rage suddenly appeared in the universe. Chapter 14:15, Mind Cliff. Chapter 14:15, Mind Cliff. As the golden divine ape appeared, its enormous power instantly converged on the palm of the ape's right hand. Boom! The divine ape punched the woman's black spear directly. Bang! With a loud noise, the powerful collision of the spear and the divine ape caused a great force to the woman, making her hands numb. The woman got nervous. The golden ape moved forward step by step and continued the attack. Boom! 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 Several big fists fell in succession with great power. The woman dressed in black defended with her spear, generating a strange whirlpool to engulf everything including the attacking force of the ape. Bang! The sound of continuous collisions resounded. Finally, the woman couldn't resist any more. She was blasted out directly, extremely weak and exhausted. The giant golden divine ape that Jian Wushuang generated continued to grow in power, showing no sign of weakening. You are defeated. Jian Wushuang looked at the woman indifferently and calmly, but he was shocked in his mind. I had to generate the divine ape dozens of times, nearly consuming 70% of my power to defeat her. If she had used other secret skills instead of confronting me face to face, maybe I would have lost the game. Although the Dark Phoenix Pavilion can't be compared with the lineage of Star, the best disciples here are no worse than disciples in the Star Palace. As for the woman in black, she clenched her hands tightly, her eyes full of unwillingness. Ling Er, you can go back, Su Ro said. The woman nodded slightly and went away. Su Ro, she is an excellent disciple, she is too proud. Lei Chao said, if she didn't choose to confront Jian Wushuang face to face, but relied on her other secret skills, she may have prevailed against the attack of the golden divine ape. She's like you. Lei Chao knew very well that Su Ro was also a proud lady. Well, there's no excuse for the defeat. We lost. Su Ro said indifferently. It's incredible for a universe god in the second heaven to have such a strong consciousness, and also to have such a good command of the five-beast soul manipulation knack. He is worth the reputation of Star Palace. Now, can you take us to the Mind Cliff? Lei Chao asked. Come with me, Su Ro said. Soon, Jian Wushuang and Lei Chao were heading for the Mind Cliff with Su Ro. Jian Wushuang's battle with Ling Er had caused a stir in the battlefield. Disciples of the Star Palace are indeed powerful. That's true. I thought that Ling Er was already one of the most powerful universe god in the second heaven, but I was wrong. But although Ling Er lost, she could almost catch up with Jian Wushuang in terms of the overall strength. The discussion continued for a long time. The disciples had never seen the strength of the Star Palace disciples before. They had some doubts about the strength of the Star Palace disciples and wanted to challenge them. But now they had really witnessed the battle and realized that they were far behind. The Mind Cliff, located in the center of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, was a huge mountain, standing tall. And the mountain was covered by a special power force. Now we are in the Mind Cliff, Su Ro said. Jian Wushuang looked at the huge mountain in front of him. The mountain was so tall that Jian Wushuang couldn't see the peak. In the middle of the mountain, there was a stairway leading to the top of the mountain. The stairway looked extraordinary. Heart Cliff has a total of 999 steps, and each step is an experience for the heart. The higher the stair is, the more difficult it is for the heart. Su Ro said, Jian Wushuang, since you have come here to cultivate your mind, you can first try your best to step on these steps and see how many you can climb. I see. Jian Wushuang nodded and started to move to the bottom of the mountain. As soon as he had stepped on the first step, a strong force came to surround him. Phantasmagoria? Jian Wushuang realized what the force was. Phantasmagoria was aimed at the consciousnesses and minds of cultivators. Specifically, being able to resist the phantasmagoria depended on the strength of the consciousness. If the consciousness was not enough, cultivators should turn to their mind. For example, the 18 Azura Hell was a powerful phantasmagoria. Cultivators without a strong consciousness had to undergo all kinds of torments. So, it was also a test of mind. Only cultivators with a resilient mind could survive such a torment, or they would go mad. Now on the first step of the mind cliff, he couldn't resist the phantasmagoria only with his consciousness strength. He could keep his mind peaceful and resilient. This phantasmagoria was like a prison. Bang! Jian Wushuang was tied to a pillar and could not move, while someone wielded a whip around his body and beat him crazily, causing many scars and resulting in a painful heart. This physical pain? It's nothing. Jian Wushuang thought it was nothing. He stayed calm and smiled. This first level of the phantasmagoria was only the physical pain of a cultivator's body and only a tiny mental pain, which even ordinary people who were patient enough could easily bear, let alone Jian Wushuang. With a faint smile, Jian Wushuang resisted the whipping and kept still. A moment later, the first level of the phantasmagoria collapsed, and Jian Wushuang managed to step onto the second step. The second step was still the physical pain of flesh and skin. However, the pain was such that Jian Wushuang's skin peeled. Near the heart cliff, Lei Chao stood side by side with Su Ro. They watched Jian Wushuang walking up the steps. From beginning to the end, Jian Wushuang stayed calm and he finally got into the 201st floor. It's all on the 201st floor, but he was still calm. His mind is not weak at all. Su Ro said, "You are right." Lei Chao nodded. "Then why did you decide to send him here?" Su Ro asked. Chapter 1416, The 400th Step. Chapter 1416, The 400th Step. If I'm not mistaken, he should be here for the mind test, right? Su Ro looked at Lei Chao. The scariest mind test in God's test was aimed at the state of mind. It was normal for geniuses like Jian Wushuang to come across a mind test in God's test. Guess as you wish, Lei Chao didn't answer directly. On Mind Cliff, Jian Wushuang continued to proceed step by step. In the beginning, he was rather relaxed. However, when he reached the 300th step, he slowed down in speed and he didn't look as relaxed as before. There was a hidden misery in his facial expression. There are 999 steps to the peak of the mind cliff, and he already felt a slight pressure on the 300th step. The following steps will be an obstacle for him and it will train his state of mind. Su Ro smiled and stole a glance at Lei Chao next to her. She said, "If there's no accident, the young man will spend another few years around this range of steps. Lei Chao, do you want to stay here or leave?" "I'll wait for him here," Lei Chao replied coldly. "Up to you. I have business to take care of. I will not keep you company. Please do as you like." Su Ro turned around and left. Lei Chao was left alone as he waited in silence. The time flew past. Jian Wushuang had been on Mind Cliff all this while. With the aid of Phantasmagoria on Mind Cliff, he continued to train his state of mind. Then, he was standing on the 331st step when he suddenly opened his eyes. Then, he took a step forward and reached the 331st step. The 332nd step. That's impressive. There were a few disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion gathered around Mind Cliff. They were astonished by Jian Wushuang's performance on Mind Cliff. I remembered when Senior Qiu Ling were challenging Mind Cliff back then, she only reached the 328th step. Senior Qiu Ling, among the disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, regardless of power or state of mind, she was the strongest. Plus, she had trained many times on Mind Cliff. But she only reached the 328th step. Her result can't be compared favorably with Jian Wushuang's, even though he is here for the first time. Jian Wushuang is really terrifyingly powerful and his state of mind is even scarier. The disciples were amazed. Stepping foot on the 332nd step represented the fact that Jian Wushuang's state of mind was strong. One should know that even universe gods on the peak to the minority of real gods who weren't strong in a state of mind might not even step foot on the 300th step. Jian Wushuang was still continuing his journey up. In the blink of an eye, 5 years passed. On Mind Cliff, Jian Wushuang had already laid foot on the 389th step. The 389th step? No, the 390th step. In the void next to Mind Cliff, Qiu Ling and Lu Shar stood side by side. They could see Jian Wushuang stepping foot on the 390th step of Mind Cliff clearly. Senior, it has been 300 years since you were last on Mind Cliff. You should have improved tremendously for the past 300 years. If you were to go on Mind Cliff again, would you be able to catch up with Jian Wushuang? Lu Shar looked at Qiu Ling and asked. No way. Qiu Ling shook her head directly. With my current power, I could only try to pass the 330th step. Among universe gods in the second heaven, it is considered rather impressive. But Jian Wushuang, he is so much more outstanding than we are. The 390th step. According to Master, there are many real gods of Dark Phoenix Pavilion who stopped at the 390th step. In terms of state of mind, Jian Wushuang is no weaker than those real gods. Monster. I wonder how he got his state of mind? Lu Shar sighed. How? Qiu Ling smiled faintly, repeated failure and lots of training. Some geniuses are like that. The bigger the failure, the tougher the training, so they get to be even more brilliant. On the contrary, if a genius were to lack experience of failure and training, his gifted talent would be wasted. Jian Wushuang is that kind of genius. If I guess correctly, he should have experienced countless obstacles since he started cultivation. The obstacles that he has been through are not something either of us could compare to. He grew up through the obstacles and became who he is today. He is an impressive genius. I can't be compared favorably with him. Qiu Ling was a true genius too, and she was confident in her personal talent. She was not someone who would admit defeat easily. Even when she had lost to Jian Wushuang previously, she never thought that she was weaker than Jian Wushuang but merely lacking time and chances. But then, looking at Jian Wushuang's performance on Mind Cliff, especially after Jian Wushuang had stepped foot on the 390th step, she decided not to challenge Jian Wushuang anymore. She knew clearly that Jian Wushuang didn't get that strong out of nowhere. I heard from the Pavilion Tower that Jian Wushuang is going to stay in Dark Phoenix Tower for 10 years. 5 years have passed and he has stepped foot on the 390th step. There are 5 years left. I wonder if he could step foot on the 400th step, Lu Shar said. The 400th step? Qiu Ling's pupils contracted. I heard from Master that there are 999 steps on Mind Cliff and the 400th step is a huge threshold. It isn't that easy to pass. The real gods of Dark Phoenix Pavilion mostly stopped below 400 steps. There is hardly anyone who has stepped foot on 400 steps or above. If Jian Wushuang were to step foot on the 400th step within the remaining 5 years, it would be really impressive. I hope he doesn't. Otherwise, our difference will be too vast, Lu Shar muttered. Let's go. Qiu Ling and Lu Shar left shortly afterwards. Jian Wushuang, who was by then on the 390th step of Mind Cliff, was suffering indefinitely in the dreamland. As he reached the 390th step, it was rather difficult for him to pass through even if it was his dreamland. A month later, he finally stepped foot on the 391st step. 3 months later, he had gotten to the 392nd step. The time continued to fly past. Out of the 10 years' time, there was only one last year left and it passed in the blink of an eye. The second inverse cultivation test was ascending in a month's time. Dark Phoenix Pavilion, in the void by Mind Cliff, Lei Chao had been guarding Mind Cliff for the past 10 years. He had never once left. 1 last month left. Lei Chao was calculating the time quietly while his gaze was fixed on Jian Wushuang on Mind Cliff. But then, on Mind Cliff, Jian Wushuang, who was stuck on the 399th step for a year, suddenly took a leap and stepped onto the 400th step firmly. As his foot touched the step, his figure shivered and his aura experienced a tremendous change. Chapter 1417. The First Level of the Mind Status. Chapter 1417. The First Level of the Mind Status. The 400th level. When Lei Chao saw Jian Wushuang had entered the 400th level, He was excited, with his eyes beady and a smile on his face. Jian Wushuang. That is enough. Come on. Lei Chao said. Jian Wushuang stopped climbing and came to Lei Chao. I thought you could learn how to control your mind through cultivation in the mind cliff, but I didn't expect you to be able to reach the first level of the mind status. It's really good. Lei Chao exclaimed. The first level of mind status? Jian Wushuang was confused. Haven't you found that something has changed in your mind? Lei Chao explained. Yes, I feel that, but I don't know what the levels of mind status are, said the Jian Wushuang. The mind status is divided into 3 levels, and the first level is a clear mind connecting with soul. This level is difficult for ordinary gods to reach. Even in the eternal chaotic world, many real gods have not reached it. Lei Chao said. Many real gods have not reached it? Jian Wushuang was surprised. Your second round of god test is coming. At this juncture, it's lucky for you to reach the first level in your mind status. It's time to go back. There's only a month left, Lei Chao said. Yes, let's go. Lei Chao and Jian Wushuang set out to leave directly. When he left, Lei Chao sent a message to Su Rou, but he did not meet Su Rou again. At an exquisite attic in the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. What an indifferent man he is. Su Rou was unsatisfied with Lei Chao. She asked her subordinate, You just said that Jian Wushuang reached the 400th level of the mind cliff. Yes, I witnessed it. So that means Jian Wushuang has achieved the first level in his mind status? Su Rou's eyes was twinkled with surprise. What a genius! When will my disciples reach such a high level? She muttered and sighed for a long time. After leaving the Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Jian Wushuang and Lei Chao went directly to the Cloud Island. Jian Wushuang, Hall Master Yuan asked us to go directly to the firmament world. He has been waiting for us there. Lei Chao said. Good. Jian Wushuang nodded. Soon, they appeared in the Cloud Island, and through a wormhole in the island, they went directly to the firmament world. The firmament world was lifeless and isolated. It was the perfect place for the god test. When they arrived, Hall Master Yuan was waiting there. How about your cultivation in the pavilion? Hall Master Yuan asked. Not bad. My mind improves. Jian Wushuang answered. Lei Chao added, He has reached the first level of mind status. Oh! Hall Master Yuan was happy. Great. It was very good for him to reach that level before the coming of the god test. God tests are extremely dangerous and full of life-threatening risks, especially the inverse cultivation test. I was quite worried before, but now you have reached the first level of mind status, I am not so worried. Then Hall Master Yuan took out several treasures. These are what I have prepared for you to pass your god test. These are 2 Heart Guard elixirs. Hall Master first handed the 2 milky elixirs to Jian Wushuang. They can make you feel calm and perform well in the god test, especially when your state of mind is affected. Jian Wushuang received the elixirs immediately. And these 2 are tribunal passing elixirs, for you to recover your wounds. The god test is aimed at your mind status and there is seldom an attack, but you can keep them for unexpected circumstances. Jian Wushuang took the 2 elixirs. As for this, Hall Master Yuan took out a bronze mirror. The bronze mirror looked antique and extraordinary. This is the exquisite mirror. It also protects your mind at a critical time. It is one of the most powerful treasures in the lineage of Star. Hall Master Yuan said, Exquisite mirror? Jian Wushuang looked at the mirror for a while and then thanked the Hall Master Yuan. You are welcome. As long as you can survive the god test, all our efforts will be worth it. Hall Master Yuan said, Well, you should keep those things with you. There's not much time left. You should make good use of it and keep yourself in an optimal state. Yes. Then Jian Wushuang sat down in an empty space above a vast sea to wait for the test. He would receive the test there. Jian Wushuang, the second round of the god test is more dangerous than the first, but it seems that you are calmer? King of Venomous Worms asked. Jian Wushuang said, Yes, maybe because I have experienced such a process before, so I am less anxious now. In my opinion, it has something to do with your improved state of mind. King of Venomous Worms said, "Do you need to go out of my body during my God test?" Jian Wushuang asked. "I don't have to because the God test will be mainly a test for the mind, without attacking your force." "That's good," Jian Wushuang said, then continued to wait. "Huh." Jian Wushuang breathed slowly, making his heart completely calm. His heart was quiet, and even the whole sky was quiet and peaceful. He was now in his optimal state. The God test was coming. Chapter 14:18, The Inverse Cultivation Test is here, a baby. Chapter 14:18, The Inverse Cultivation Test is here, a baby. Rumble. Huge dark clouds gathered from all directions. The entire firmament world suddenly became dark. It was dark and misty. Jian Wushuang sat in the void, right in the middle of the sea region. His eyes were still closed. Although he felt the changes in the surrounding universe, he didn't move an inch. At the very end of Firmament World, there were two figures standing side by side. They were Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao. "It's going to start." Hall Master Yuan looked at the huge dark clouds gathered above Jian Wushuang's head and his face grew solemn. He experienced 9 sacred thunders during his first inverse cultivation test. The last one was a combination of a thunder test, fire test, and mind test. His second inverse cultivation test should be stronger than his first, and it is supposedly aimed at his state of mind. "I wonder if Jian Wushuang can pass." Lei Chao looked worried. "No choice. As he is an inverse cultivator, he is destined to go through this test." Hall Master sighed. "We have done what we could, we have prepared what we could. As for if he will pass in the end, it comes down to his own capability and his choices." Inverse cultivation. Lei Chao shook his head in silence. As the scariest inverse cultivation in eternal chaotic world, due to its abnormality, due to its quirkiness, the universe couldn't tolerate it. Above the sea, the dark clouds churned and covered most of Firmament World. The surface area that the clouds covered was a few folds wider than when Jian Wushuang had gotten through his first inverse cultivation test. However, as the coverage of the dark clouds grew, there wasn't much power within them. Forget about the pressure, there wasn't even one bit of destructive matter. This inverse cultivation test is uncommon. Hall Master Yuan's pupil contracted. With such a huge coverage of clouds, there isn't one bit of pressure or destructive manner. Lei Chao looked solemn too. In any ordinary cultivator's God's test, there would be terrifying force and pressure as the clouds formed, and the destructive matter would be strong too. Just like Jian Wushuang's first inverse cultivation test, the power of the clouds was earth-shattering. But now, the clouds for his second inverse cultivation test. There wasn't any force or noise. Even the two top experts, Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, couldn't tell the actual situation of the clouds. As it was unknown, it was even more dangerous. Just then, rumble. There was suddenly a crack on the dark cloud in the middle. The crack grew huge at a terrifying speed, and there was suddenly a cloud of dark mist that appeared in the crack. The cloud of dark mist didn't possess any sort of imposing or destroying manner, but the moment it appeared it was enough to frighten any cultivator. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, who were watching at the edge of Firmament World, saw the cloud of dark mist and were shocked. "It's here!" The cloud of dark mist covered Jian Wushuang's body like a flowing light. Jian Wushuang couldn't dodge it all and let the cloud of dark mist cover him. The enormous amount of dark mist entered his body directly. The second inverse cultivation test is finally here. When Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, there was a sharp light in them. There wasn't any terror, only absolute calmness. Such a creepy feeling. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. He felt the dark mist enter his body, but it didn't cause any damage to his divine body. On the contrary, he felt rather comfortable and relaxed. He indulged in the feeling. Gradually, his consciousness became light. He was in total calmness. Deep sleep. Jian Wushuang's consciousness had entered a deep sleep straight away. Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang. King of Venomous Worms who lived in Jian Wushuang noticed his current situation and got a shock. He shouted with all his strength, trying to wake Jian Wushuang up. However, regardless of how he shouted, Jian Wushuang didn't react. His consciousness was in a deep sleep. Unless he woke up soon, if someone came to kill him on the spot, he wouldn't know. Just as his consciousness fell into deep sleep, he closed his eyes again. Then he looked calm and friendly, he was even smiling faintly. The smile was very sincere. Then, before King of Venomous Worms, Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao's shocked gaze, Jian Wushuang's body was changing. His body shrunk at a rapid speed, his skin grew fair and smooth, even his face became young and immature. In a short period, Jian Wushuang became a kid that looked the age of 8 or 9, and it continued. From the age of 8 or 9, he became 5 or 6, then 2 or 3 in the end. Jian Wushuang became a baby. Yes, a baby. A little newborn. This. Hall Master Yuan, Lei Chao and King of Venomous Worms in Jian Wushuang were astonished. Rejuvenation wasn't anything strange in eternal chaotic world. Some elixirs and unique treasures could easily rejuvenate someone. Even if one really rejuvenated, it was merely a change in appearance and his power and mind would remain the same. However, Jian Wushuang in his second inverse cultivation test had become a baby. Without any power, just an ordinary baby. What is he experiencing in his second inverse cultivation test? Hall Master Yuan couldn't help but cry out. Unbelievable. The sight before his eyes was unbelievable. However, regardless of how unbelievable the sight was, they could only watch helplessly. It was a huge estate. The estate looked just like the kind a rich family would have. In the estate, there were many people walking back and forth. They looked anxious. So, she gave birth. Sir, Madam gave birth to a chubby boy. Along with a servant's delighted scream from the room, the people walking back and forth along the estate looked surprised. Congratulations, sir. Congratulations, sir. There were many who congratulated him. I have a son. I have a son. The estate owner was extremely delighted. Sir, quickly think of a name for your son, the butler urged. I decided on the name long ago. He will be called Muchen. He chuckled. Muchen, it's a nice name. Everyone, remember to take good care of young Master Muchen from today onwards, the butler instructed the surrounding servants. Yes, sir, the surrounding servants replied in unison. Send my order down. Everyone in the Mu residence should be rewarded today, the Master of Mu residence announced. The young Master of Mu residence, Muchen, had been born. Chapter 1419 9 Lives Reincarnation Test. Chapter 1419 9 Lives Reincarnation Test. Family Mu was a family living in a peaceful time without wars. The father of the big family Mu was a famous businessman. His only son, Muchen, had been living an abundant, worry-free life. Muchen was smart and eager to learn and was talented with business. When he was 10 years old, he used his extra money, which was 10,000 renminbi he had accumulated, to start a business. In a short half-year, he had earned 200,000 renminbi, 20 times his original investment. His parents loved him a lot, and his relatives and friends all believed that he would be successful in the future. When he reached the age of 18, Muchen married his beloved with the approval of his family, and in the next year, he had his first child. Afterwards, he began to take over his father's business and expanded the business. Then he opened a gold store called Noble House, in which gold was sold. Soon, many subsidiaries opened all over Muchen's country. In middle age, he continued to enlarge his business and became the leader of the local business association. Not only was he rich, but he also had great power, and even the emperors of every kingdom were in awe of him. In his 50s, he gradually handed over the noble house to his son, while he enjoyed the happiness of retired life with his wife. He was blessed by wealth and happiness throughout his life. At the age of 106, he passed away together with his wife, looking back on a life with no regrets. Beneath the vast black clouds, Jian Wushuang was sitting there peacefully falling asleep. But at that moment he was not a baby anymore. He had become a gray-haired old man who had reached the end of his life, completely still. King of venomous worms, as well as Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, had no idea what had happened. They had seen that Jian Wushuang had become a baby, but then he had grown from a baby to a child, a teenager, to adulthood, and finally to an old man. He had experienced a person's lifetime from childhood to old age. They still had no idea what the reason behind it was. All of a sudden, it's beginning to change again. Hall Master Yuan exclaimed. Jian Wushuang had become a baby again. This was the second time Jian Wushuang had been transformed into a baby in the God test. This time, he was born in a royal family as a king's son named Jin Mo. Jin Mo, at the age of 12, showed his literary and martial excellence, so that no one in the royal family was superior to him. When he was 20 years old, he succeeded to the throne and began to reform the whole court. It took him only 3 years to reform and stabilize the corrupt court. At the same time, he spent 7 years boosting the economy and building an invincible army of 400,000 soldiers. Then, at the age of 30, Jin Mo began to expand his territory and to exterminate the surrounding dynasties which were weaker than his. Within less than 10 years, he had made his dynasty one of the 6 major empires in the world. When he was 60 years old, he conquered the other 5 empires, and at the same time wiped out all the weak kingdoms and unified the whole world. He became the first emperor to unite the whole world. He did his best to make the people of this world live and work in peace and prosperity. People praised him everywhere, and his reputation lasted thousands of years. From ancient times to the present, no emperor could compare. Finally, the world was made into a real paradise, and the emperor died without regrets. Beneath the clouds, Jian Wushuang, once in the form of an old man, became a baby again. The third time. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao both held hands tightly, feeling nervous and confused. They didn't know that Jian Wushuang was in the 3rd round of the reincarnation, each of which involved experiencing a whole lifetime. This time, he was a martial art player whose martial arts were paramount and well-respected. He was named Lu Xian and born in a village in the mountains. This village was named Town Lu. Within the boundaries of heaven. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao looked at Jian Wushuang gradually changing from babies to an elder over and over again. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao both got used to the rounds of reincarnation, but they were still counting the times. Buzz! Jian Wushuang's body changed again, from an elder to a baby. The 9th time. Lei Chao was shocked. 9 is the total of a complete series. So it should be his last change. Hall Master Yuan speculated. As Hall Master Yuan had guessed, Jian Wushuang did not go on becoming a baby or an old man for the 10th time and gradually returned to his original appearance. He has recovered. Both Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao were excited. At the same time, Jian Wushuang's consciousness slowly came to life. Where am I? As Jian Wushuang woke up, a source of power in his body erupted, like a fire burning in his heart. The intense pain started torturing Jian Wushuang. It's the exquisite mirror. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands. He realized that the 9 rounds of reincarnation were caused by the power of the exquisite mirror. At the same time, all the complex memories of reincarnation rushed into his mind. These memories, a total of 9, were precisely the memories of the 9th rounds he had experienced in the God test when his consciousness had fallen asleep. Mu Chen, Jin Mo, Lu Xian, 9 different memories with 9 different identities all rushed into his mind in a moment. Jian Wushuang's face and eyes went red and he was insane in a way which he never been before. Then he understood, it is the 9 lives reincarnation test that I am facing. Chapter 1420 Life and Death. Chapter 1420 Life and Death. Go through 9 reincarnations, combine memories from 9 different lives and recognize oneself. That was the 9 lives reincarnation test. Jian Wushuang, standing below the clouds, had bloodshot eyes which showed an unprecedented madness. In his head, the memories from 9 different lives were devouring his consciousness. I, Mu Chen, the richest man in the world, can get anything I want from the universe. Give me your body and I will let you enjoy no end of wealth and honor. From the very first life, the memory of the number 1 rich businessman who had built the noble hall, Mu Chen, was replaying in Jian Wushuang's head. I have been the emperor for a long time. The royal power belongs to me. Who dares to go against me in the world? This body belongs to me. From the second life came the memory of the emperor, Jinemo. He bellowed in madness. Chiu heir, my Chiu heir. Where is she? I'm going to look for her. No one can stop me. The memory from the 7th life brought about an unprecedented stubbornness that was going to eat up Jian Wushuang's consciousness. The 8th life, the 9th life. The memories from the 9 lives were like Jian Wushuang living through 9 different lives. The 9 Jian Wushuangs went through their lives in their respective imaginary worlds and possessed their personal consciousnesses and thoughts. They also had their own desires. For instance, the 1st life went after wealth. The 2nd life went after absolute royal power. The 3rd life went after martial arts. Simultaneously, the 9 Jian Wushuangs were living together in one body. Including Jian Wushuang's consciousness, there were 10 different consciousnesses. As the saying goes, one mountain cannot accommodate 2 tigers. There were 10 consciousnesses in Jian Wushuang's divine body. The 9 illusionary consciousnesses would naturally consume him and fight for control of Jian Wushuang's body. Humph! Jian Wushuang's face was distorted and his entire body was shivering vigorously. However, his features looked ferocious and he maintained absolute sobriety in his consciousness. Shut up! All of you are merely exist in imaginary worlds. You don't exist in reality and you shouldn't exist. Regardless of how much I have been through, how many emotions, imagination is imagination after all. Jian Wushuang clenched his teeth and bellowed. Ah! As you're not going to give your body to me, I shall die with you. The emperor from the 2nd life, Jin Mo, bellowed. The very next moment, the illusionary consciousness merged with Jian Wushuang's personal consciousness. I'll fight with you. The other 8 consciousness took the same path that Jin Mo did. In that instant, 9 illusionary consciousnesses merged together with Jian Wushuang's. Previously, the 9 illusionary consciousnesses had existed in the same body as his consciousness. But then, the 9 illusionary consciousnesses were merging into his own consciousness. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's consciousness was at the brink of collapsing. He roared, "Who am I? Who the hell am I? Am I Mu Chen, Dinamo, or Lu Xian?" The entire firmament world could hear Jian Wushuang's bellow. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, who were at the edge of firmament world, saw the scene and their faces grew grave. What's going on? I feel that his mind is on the brink of collapsing. Even the exquisite mirror heart guard elixir won't be of help. It couldn't protect his mind. What is he experiencing? Hall Master Yuan was anxious. His mind is on the edge. If it were to persist, his mind would collapse. By then, he would become a mad devil. He'd rather die than stay alive. Lei Chao's eyebrows were tightly knitted as well. Both of them could feel the gravity of Jian Wushuang's current situation. It was definitely very dangerous. Only a little more to go before Jian Wushuang would drown in the unreturned path. Just that one bit. Just that one bit. He must steady himself. Otherwise, he's doomed. Hall Master Yuan clenched his hand together. The two of them stared at Jian Wushuang and felt Jian Wushuang's change. Jian Wushuang stood at the edge of the cliff with half of his foot hanging off. At that point, even a casual breeze could send him into the bottomless abyss. Fortunately, he didn't step out the remaining half a step. Under the clouds, Jian Wushuang had become mad and let out an angry bellow like a devil. In the depths of his eyes and in the bottom of his heart, there was still a hint of light. Jian Wushuang was glad that he had trained up his state of mind to the first level in Dark Phoenix Pavilion. It was because he reached the first level. His true will could just about maintain its tinge of brightness. Otherwise, he would have been possessed entirely. It seems like he managed to guard the last bit of his mind. Hall Master Yuan sighed a breath of relief. Even so, the situation isn't favorable. Who knows what he's going through right now? His last bit of mind, how long can he maintain it for? Lei Chao said in a deep voice. Even so, it's better than a collapsed mind. Now that he's steadied his last bit of mind, there is space for a struggle. Now it comes down to how determined the man is, Hall Master Yuan said. Determination. Yes, what Jian Wushuang needed then was to be determined. He steadied the last bit of his mind. As long as he could stay calm until he could remove the illusions and recognize himself clearly, he would pass the test. But in the process, every breath was a life and death torture to Jian Wushuang. However, it would still be a while until he would undo the illusions and recognize himself. Naturally, his determination was the key element. Under the clouds, Jian Wushuang looked like a mad devil, just as before, but he had calmed down after his bellowing. In his sea of consciousness, his consciousness had drowned in an unprecedented chaos. Countless illusionary memories overlapped with his own memories and it became complicated. In the beginning, Jian Wushuang couldn't differentiate himself. However, he guarded his last bit of mind. Gradually, he understood his identity. I'm a disciple of Star Palace. I am the husband of Leng Rushuang. I am the direct descendant of Xian Yi. I came from Green Fire World, Sword Marquee Mansion in Nanyang Land. My name is Jian Wushuang. A shrill scream reverberated through Jian Wushuang's body. In the complicated consciousness, his personal consciousness gradually took up the leading position. Then, he quickly started removing the illusionary consciousnesses one by one. During this process, every single step was dangerous. With the slightest carelessness, his own mind would have collapsed. Chapter 1421. Finally passed the test. Chapter 1421. Finally passed the test. The cloud over Jian Wushuang lingered for 10 years. It's been 10 years. It's the first time I've seen someone's God test should last 10 years. Even Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, who had stayed for a long time in the firmament world, felt surprised by Jian Wushuang's God test. Ordinary practitioners' God tests, even the longest, usually lasted for only several days. But now, it had been 10 years since the beginning of Jian Wushuang's God test, and it was still going on. His mind has been on the verge of collapse for 10 years. He is truly resilient. Hall Master Yuan Palace praised Jian Wushuang. Even real gods of the vast eternal chaotic world, including you and me, would have gone mad from staying in such a torture for 10 years, but Jian Wushuang has endured. Lei Chao was also surprised. This kind of test was really painful. Almost every breath was a kind of suffering. Ordinary practitioners, who could only maintain for several days, were considered to be good. But Jian Wushuang had resisted for 10 years. No wonder Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao couldn't help but admire him. Just then, Hall Master Yuan felt that Jian Wushuang's breath was calming down. Maybe the God test is coming to an end. Lei Chao said. For 10 years, the breath of Jian Wushuang had been violent, just like a madman. But now, the breath of Jian Wushuang had quickly calmed down. In just a moment, his breath had completely calmed down, and his grim face gradually relaxed. In the heavens, the cloud gradually dissipated. A golden light suddenly appeared, illuminating the whole heaven. Divine light. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao looked at each other and smiled. The God test is over. Hall Master Yuan was excited. Our 10 years' wait has been rewarded. Lei Chao said happily. Divine light was the light that only appeared after the God test was finished. When Jian Wushuang passed his first God test, there was a similar divine light, so this time, the light showed that Jian Wushuang has succeeded. Bang! A golden light came down to Jian Wushuang in 9 rays, and in an instant he was completely enveloped by the warm light. Like the first God test, the light came in 9 rays, which were now embracing Jian Wushuang. Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao were waiting and watching the whole process. The baptism of the divine light did not last long, and it soon ended. As soon as it was over, the clouds dispersed, and the whole sky was again bright. After being embraced by the light, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, a powerful light burst from his eyes. The light was so powerful that it flashed and tore apart an island in the distance directly. The God test is over now. Jian Wushuang held his hands tightly with his heart full of joy. Congratulations, King of Venomous Worms said. He also felt relieved for Jian Wushuang's success. During the 10 years when Jian Wushuang endured the torture, King of Venomous Worms always feared that Jian Wushuang could go mad. Jian Wushuang, come on. Hall Master Yuan came to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang said hello to Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao respectfully. Congratulations, you have passed the God test. Hall Master Yuan smiled. Now you only have to pass another God test and then you will be a top genius in the future. I'm looking forward to that day too. Lei Chao also laughed. Jian Wushuang was delighted. Jian Wushuang had passed 2/3 of the God test, each round of which was risky. There was still only the last step, and also the most difficult one. Jian Wushuang, what happened to you in the God test? Hall Master Yuan asked. Lei Chao also looked at Jian Wushuang curiously. They did not know what Jian Wushuang had experienced, but they could feel the danger of the process. After a while, Jian Wushuang said, I went through the 9 lives reincarnation test. 9 lives reincarnation test? They were curious about the details. Then Jian Wushuang recounted his experience in a simple way. Through the simple description, Lei Chao and Hall Master Yuan could still feel how dangerous it was and they were shocked. 9 lives reincarnation? You had to integrate the memory of the 9 different lifetimes, and even the illusory consciousness, into your own consciousness. What a terrible torture! Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao couldn't help exclaiming. This was absolutely the most unusual and dangerous God test they had ever heard of. 9 memories and consciousness were imposed on me, and they were beyond what I can control. I was on the verge of madness, but, fortunately, I reached the first level of the mind status from the experience in the mind cliff. As such, I could remain clear-minded, which was the most important thing. In these 10 years, every moment was a torture of life and death for me because I had to fight with an illusion. I had to stay alert or I would collapse. Honestly, I feel proud of myself, Jian Wushuang smiled. He knew how difficult the God test was. Even real gods found it hard to overcome, but Jian Wushuang had survived. It was a kind of unimaginable resilience and perseverance that had enabled him to survive. Though, without the appalling thunderstorm, the second round of the God test was far more difficult than the first one. Jian Wushuang said. Chapter 1422, Universe God in the Second Heaven. Chapter 1422, Universe God in the Second Heaven. It was true that it was 1,000-fold more dangerous than his first inverse cultivation test. However, regardless of how dangerous it was, I passed through the second inverse cultivation test. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang, Hall Master Yuan looked. Now that you have passed through your second inverse cultivation test and became a real universe god in the second heaven, your power must have improved tremendously, right? Power. Jian Wushuang lifted his eyebrows and a smile was revealed on his face. From a universe god in the first heaven to the second heaven, there was originally a huge gap. Any ordinary cultivator who managed to break through the threshold would naturally go through a transformation in power. Jian Wushuang, who was an inverse cultivator, naturally had an even more terrifying power increase. I feel that I could currently fight against Ling Feibai without using soul power at all. It might even be difficult to call it a victory, Jian Wushuang smiled. Ling Feibai, the genius of the geniuses. Due to the emergence of 3 strongest sword principle, Ling Feibai, who was just a universe god in the second heaven, could be compared favorably with an advanced universe god in the third heaven when his divine power erupted. Plus, he cultivated some secret skills and created unique skills. Hence, He could stand firmly on his feet among the peak universe gods in the third heaven when it came to fighting power. In the previous fight, Jian Wushuang could only rely on his soul power. He had put all of his tricks to play and could only be evenly matched with Ling Feibai. In the end, he was still defeated. But then, although they were both universe gods in the second heaven who had merged 3 strongest sword principles, Jian Wushuang was an inverse cultivator and he possessed the ancient god bloodline. Even though he had passed through his second inverse cultivation test and was still a 5-starred ancient god, he was now on the second stage of being a 5-starred ancient god. His ancient god power had increased tremendously as well. His divine power eruption alone was sufficient for him to fight against any peak universe gods in the third heaven. With the aid of blood-killing plate armor and the divine power eruption, no ordinary peak universe god in the third heaven could win against him. The eruption of divine power was so fierce. Even though he was weaker in unique skills, it could be compensated for. Hence, Jian Wushuang had the guts to say that he could evenly match Ling Feibai without putting his soul power to play. It wasn't a lie. I'm not sure how much more powerful you are now, but I can sense that your overall power has increased tremendously. Hall Master Yuan smiled. And, as you have passed through your second inverse cultivation test, you will appear as a universe god in the third heaven in Lineage of Star. As you're a universe god in the third heaven, you can take a look at our most precious Real God Hall in Lineage of Star. Real God Hall? Jian Wushuang was surprised. Real God Hall was quite famous in Lineage of Star. Among all resources in Lineage of Star, it was the most precious kind. It was a pity that the prerequisites for entering Real God Hall were extremely high. Not only did one have to be a disciple of Star Palace, but they must also be a universe god in the third heaven. Before Jian Wushuang had passed through his second inverse cultivation test, he hadn't been qualified to enter Real God Hall. But now, he was qualified. Real God Hall has great opportunities. If you were to grasp them properly, they would be enough for you to take your power to a whole new level. Plus, the opportunities in Real God Hall not only focus on power, they will be influential to your growth in the future, Hall Master Yuan explained. Jian Wushuang listened, getting more and more excited. Besides Real God Hall, Scripture Depository, as your second inverse cultivation test was approaching, you had no time to cultivate your second secret skill. But now, you can take time to pick one from the remaining 3 secret skills and cultivate it. Any one of them would be extremely beneficial to you, Hall Master Yuan said. Jian Wushuang nodded. He had been yearning for the remaining 3 secret skills in Scripture Depository since long ago. Especially when he had seen Ling Feibai performing Supreme Heaven during the battle. Ling Feibai defeated him because of that secret skill. Jian Wushuang, I'll give you 100 years to cultivate the second secret skill from Scripture Depository. Be prepared. I will assign you your ultimate disciple task 100 years later, Hall Master Yuan said. Ultimate disciple task? Jian Wushuang stunned. In 100 years? Isn't that too soon? Lei Chao looked at Hall Master Yuan in shock. To the others, it might be too early. But to him, it's not that early, Hall Master Yuan smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang's face grew solemn. He had stayed in Lineage of Star for so long. Of course, he knew about the ultimate disciple task. Lineage of Star focused on nurturing geniuses, but geniuses only grow during difficulty and massacre. Lineage of Star knew that well. Hence, Lineage of Star often passed down training tasks to their disciples. Among all the training tasks, the most dangerous and highest level one would be the ultimate disciple task. The ultimate disciple task could only be assigned to disciples who were universe gods in the third heaven, and only disciples who were universe gods in the third heaven were qualified to complete the task. The moment the task was given, the disciples couldn't refuse and had to complete it within the given time. If one couldn't complete it, the punishment would be severe. Of course, the task would come with extra gifts. The extra gifts would also be a chance that was hard to come by. Hence, the strong disciples who were universe gods in the third heaven in Lineage of Star were dying to receive the task. But because the difficulty of the final task was high, there were many disciples that died on the way to their journey. As such, under normal circumstances, only when disciples who were universe God in the third heaven had reached a certain level would the task be assigned. For one who had just passed their inverse cultivation test and immediately received their ultimate disciple task like Jian Wushuang, it would be quite rare. Only an absolute genius would receive such treatment. Come on, it's time to return, Hall Master Yuan smiled. Jian Wushuang, Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao departed back to Lineage of Star immediately. In the boundless Milky Way, in Lineage of Star's old lair, Jian Wushuang parted ways with Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao the moment they returned. Among the buildings, Jian Wushuang walked casually and came across many disciples in Lineage of Star on the way. Senior Jian Wushuang. Greetings, Senior. The ordinary disciples saw Jian Wushuang and bowed politely. Jian Wushuang found the sight strange. Before the battle, none of the disciples looked up to me. Forget about greeting me, they even looked at me in disdain. But now, Jian Wushuang shook his head and sighed. Power. It was all about power. Ever since the battle where he had proved himself with his power, the doubts about him as a disciple of Star Palace in Lineage of Star had vanished into thin air. The disciples utterly submitted to him and even revered him. Chapter 1423, The Four Supreme Doctrine, 9 Divine God Doctrine. Chapter 1423, The Four Supreme Doctrine, 9 Divine God Doctrine. The news about Jian Wushuang returning to Lineage of Star stirred a commotion in Lineage of Star. Jian Wushuang had suddenly came across a thunder test during the battle. Many disciples made guesses that Jian Wushuang should be going through his God's test in the third heaven. Then, when Jian Wushuang had returned to Lineage of Star, his aura obviously went through a drastic change. Because of the treasure that the founder of Lineage of Star had bestowed on him, Jian Wushuang was obviously giving out an aura of a universe God in the third heaven. Hence, the news of Jian Wushuang had passed through God's test in the third heaven, and the news that he had become a universe God in the third heaven spread across the entire Lineage of Star like wildfire. There weren't many universe God in the third heaven in Lineage of Star. Universe God in the third heaven who were disciples of Star Palace were even rarer. Jian Wushuang passed through the buildings and arrived before a golden palace with an imposing aura. At the entrance of the golden palace, there was an engraving of a real God pavilion. Real God pavilion. Looking at the golden palace with its imposing aura, Jian Wushuang lifted the corners of his mouth and walked forward. There was a white-haired elderly who sat at the entrance of the golden palace. The white-haired elderly had his eyes closed like an old monk in meditation. Elderly. Jian Wushuang bowed slightly at the white-haired elderly. The white-haired elderly slowly opened his eyes and took a glance at Jian Wushuang with his murky eyes. Jian Wushuang? The white-haired elderly had gone to watch the battle previously and he had seen Jian Wushuang's magnificent performance. Oh, you became a universe God in the third heaven? The white-haired elderly fixed his gaze on him. Elderly, I'd like to go into Real God Hall, Jian Wushuang said straightforwardly. You are a universe God in the third heaven and also a disciple of Star Palace. You are qualified to enter. However, I have to remind you that it isn't easy to open the Real God Hall every time. The price to pay is terrifyingly high too. Even a disciple of Star Palace only has one chance to enter for free. To enter for a second time, one would be required to complete a training task and receive an additional grant, the white-haired elderly said. I see. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. He never knew about this before. You can give further thought as to whether you want to enter now, the white-haired elderly said with a smile as he waited for Jian Wushuang's answer. Jian Wushuang hesitated for a short while before he came to a conclusion. My ultimate disciple task will come in another 100 years. Once I have completed my ultimate disciple task, I will receive an additional grant. By then, I will have a chance to enter the Real God Pavilion again. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly and said, Elderly, I shall enter now. All right, I will open it for you. You can enter directly. Remember, you can only stay in Real God Hall for 1 month during each visit. In that month, you should appreciate your time and not waste the opportunity, the white-haired elderly exhorted. Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. After the white-haired elderly opened the door to enter Real God Hall, he took a huge stride into Real God Hall. It was a vast starry sky. Jian Wushuang stood right in the middle of the starry sky and looked around suspiciously. Real God Hall, the most precious land of opportunities on Lineage of Star. What kind of opportunities are there here? Jian Wushuang was curious. Just then, what? There was a huge, tempestuous river that appeared at the end of the starry sky, and it was soaring towards him at a terrifying speed. The river flowed so swiftly that Jian Wushuang didn't manage to respond in time but was swallowed entirely. In the depths of the river, Jian Wushuang couldn't feel any impact and could only feel a unique strength from all direction. This is? Jian Wushuang was astonished. He could tell that the huge river was formed by these unique strengths. The unique strengths, Jian Wushuang couldn't determine what they were. Such incredible strength. Jian Wushuang extended his hand and touched the river water that was formed by the unique strengths. He couldn't see or touch the strengths, he could only feel them. These strengths, some I am familiar with, but most of them are very new to me. What are they? Jian Wushuang creased their eyebrows. Just then, King of Venomous Worms suddenly spoke. Jian Wushuang, the strength that you can feel now is the purest and also the strongest power in eternal chaotic world. Its births and heaven ways exist in the cycle of heaven ways. The power of heaven way. Heaven way. Jian Wushuang stared. Heaven way is the beginning of all living things in the universe. Eternal chaotic world that we are in, the 10 cultivation sanctuaries, to the next eternal world or even Eon's world, they are all nurtured by Heaven way. The cycle of Heaven way was formed by 13 types of strengths in total. King of Venomous Worms explained. These power of Heaven way are shrouded in mystery. They are extremely fierce. Many cultivators in eternal chaotic world are dying to get the fierce power of Heaven way. Hence, there are cultivators who have tried to comprehend the power of Heaven way, which then derived the process of the 4 Supreme Doctrine, 9 Divine God Doctrine. The cultivators in eternal chaotic world, through comprehension of the 4 Supreme Doctrine, 9 Divine God Doctrine with the aid of power of Heaven way, could release even stronger and more impressive power. However, because the power of Heaven way is too mysterious, only experts above the level of real God are qualified to comprehend under normal circumstance. As for Universe God, any ordinary Universe God isn't qualified to comprehend such strength. Only some true geniuses or incredible existences could try to comprehend one of the doctrines after they become Universe God in the 3rd heaven. It is extremely rare. I reckon that there shouldn't be many in the entire eternal chaotic world. Jian Wushuang, do you still remember the genius, Duan Lingfeng, that you met on Ancient Star Sea back then? I told you that you met the real genius then. The reason why I said so was that I could tell that he already understood Massacre Doctrine in the 9 Heaven God Doctrine. Duan Lingfeng? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but think of the genius that he was friends with in Ancient Star Sea. Back then, King of Venomous Worms had said that Duan Lingfeng took the step. Jian Wushuang didn't understand the step that King of Venomous Worms was talking about. But then he understood. It turned out that Duan Lingfeng was a super genius who comprehended the power of Heaven way when he was just a universe god. Back when we saw Duan Lingfeng, he had just passed his god's test in the 3rd heaven. But his comprehension of Massacre Doctrine was extremely high. In other words, he had already understood a slight bit of Massacre Doctrine when he was a universe god in the 2nd heaven. A genius like him was hard to find, even in the 10 cultivation sanctuaries. King of Venomous Worms continued. Chapter 1424, Reincarnation Doctrine. Chapter 1424, Reincarnation Doctrine. Jian Wushuang was even more amazed by Duan Lingfeng's talent after he heard what King of Venomous Worms said. In eternal chaotic world, Universe gods in the third heaven who could comprehend a slight bit of power of Heaven Wei could be considered as a monster among monsters. There weren't many of them. However, Duan Lingfeng understood a slight bit of massacre doctrine when he was only a universe god in the second heaven. No wonder King of Venomous Worms had complimented him back then. The Supreme Four doctrine, the Nine Heaven God doctrine, either one of them would be extremely difficult to grasp. However, Lineage of Star lives up to its name of Overlord in Purple Moon Sanctuary. They made great efforts to create a river solely with the power of Heaven Wei. The river of Heaven Wei included the Supreme Four doctrine, the Nine Heaven God doctrine. When you're in the river, you can feel these powers of Heaven Wei clearly. The clearer you can feel them, the easier you will be able to comprehend them. The real God Hall deserves to be the most precious land of opportunities in Lineage of Star. It's too useful, the King of Venomous Worms sounded surprised. Obviously, even with his broadness of vision, he had never seen such great effort and such an amazing place for comprehension of the power of Heaven Wei. Jian Wushuang, the real God Hall has an unforeseeable benefit to you. You only have a month's time. Don't waste it. Use the time to understand, King of Venomous Worms said in a hushed voice. Jian Wushuang nodded. He had found out the existence of the Supreme Four doctrine and the Nine Heaven God doctrine. After Jian Wushuang had found out that Duan Lingfeng took the leap because he comprehended a slight bit of massacre doctrine, he yearned for the power of Heaven Wei. But real God Hall was the best place to comprehend the power of Heaven Wei. It shouldn't be missed. In the river that was made up of the power of Heaven Wei, Jian Wushuang sat down. He closed his eyes and felt the power of Heaven Wei surrounding him. Jian Wushuang felt that parts of the power of Heaven Wei were extremely familiar. The strength should be the power of space, right? Jian Wushuang felt one of the strengths. That was the strength that made him feel extremely familiar. One should know that one of the three strongest sword principle that Jian Wushuang opened up was the space-time sword principle, and it involved the power of space-time. He understood the power of space-time to a certain level, but it had not involved Heaven Wei yet. But then, he felt the power of space-time in the river of Heaven Wei. Space-time doctrine was one of the four supreme doctrine. Out of the four supreme doctrine and the Nine Heaven God doctrine, the former is slightly longer and more difficult to understand. The latter is the reverse. However, overall, it isn't much different. Jian Wushuang, if you were to find that you were more familiar with the power of space-time, it would mean that you're more suitable to comprehend this doctrine, but not those that you don't find familiar. You will find it rather difficult to comprehend them. The King of Venomous Worms' voice was heard in Jian Wushuang's head. Understood, Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. If merely based on intimacy, I feel that there are two Heaven Weis that I found closest to me. One is space-time doctrine, while the other unique strength should belong to reincarnation doctrine. Reincarnation doctrine, it involved reincarnation. Among the three strongest sword principles that Jian Wushuang had opened up, there was a reincarnation doctrine. Besides, the most important part was that he had just passed his second inverse cultivation test and had experienced the 9 lives reincarnation test. He had just experienced the 9 lives reincarnation test, and his understanding of reincarnation was beyond anyone's comparison. Then, he could feel the surrounding power of reincarnation, and he realized that he was comprehending the reincarnation doctrine. He found it even easier than the space-time doctrine. The 4 supreme doctrine and the 9 divine God doctrine, the easiest should be the reincarnation doctrine. Jian Wushuang smiled. If so, what are you waiting for? In this 1 month, seize the time and spend all your effort in understanding the reincarnation doctrine. As for the space-time doctrine and the others, you can put them aside for now, King of Venomous Worms said. Jian Wushuang nodded as he understood himself. He could only enter Real God Hall once, and he could only stay for 1 month on each visit. Hence, the time was extremely precious. If he were to be distracted and try to comprehend both reincarnation and space-time doctrine at the same time, 1 month would obviously be insufficient. He might as well focus entirely on reincarnation doctrine only. In Real God Hall, Jian Wushuang had already started comprehending the doctrine wholeheartedly. Reincarnation. The combination of yin and yang, the life and death cycle, it is reincarnation. Half a month flew past. It's done. Jian Wushuang sat in Real God Hall and he suddenly opened his eyes. There was excitement in his eyes. Along with a clap of his hands, a unique strength slowly gathered. The strength, it was the power of reincarnation. Reincarnation doctrine, beginner? King of Venomous Worms found it unbelievable. How could it be so easy? King of Venomous Worms was astonished. King of Venomous Worms, didn't you say it would be extremely difficult to understand the power of Heaven Way? But why? Jian Wushuang was surprised too. He never thought that he could understand the reincarnation doctrine so quickly and so easily. In just half a month's time, he had mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation. Although the power of reincarnation was weak, Jian Wushuang had actually become a beginner on reincarnation doctrine. Luck. King of Venomous Worms complimented. Back when you opened up reincarnation sword principle, you already possessed the basis of comprehending reincarnation doctrine. However, you're lucky that you happened to experience 9 lives reincarnation test during your second inverse cultivation test. After you experienced 9 lives reincarnation test, your understanding of reincarnation was far beyond anyone else's. Besides, you're in Real God Hall and you get to feel the power of reincarnation clearly. Most importantly, you are a quick learner. Thanks to all of that, you comprehended 1 bit of power of reincarnation within half a month. Half a month. TSK. If the others were to find out that it only took you half a month from getting in touch with Heaven Way to mastering the power of reincarnation, they would definitely be jealous. One must know, in eternal chaotic world, there were many real gods that spent a long time and invested great effort but couldn't grasp the power of Heaven Way. Well, comparing one to another does piss people off. Hearing King of Venomous Worms compliment, Jian Wushuang smiled. I just mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation and I am considered only a beginner in reincarnation doctrine, but there is a space for improvement. For the remaining half of a month, I have to use the time to improve the mastery of power of reincarnation, Jian Wushuang thought and continued to comprehend the doctrine. The 1-month time limit was over really soon. Chapter 1425, 4 Secret Skills of Lineage of Star. Chapter 1425, 4 Secret Skills of Lineage of Star. Phew! Jian Wushuang let out a breath as he walked out of the Real God Hall. Jian Wushuang, how did it go? The white-haired elderly outside Real God Hall casually asked. Not bad, Jian Wushuang smiled as he replied. In actual fact, his visit to Real God Hall was better than not bad. With the aid Real God Hall, he had mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation and become a beginner of reincarnation doctrine. What he achieved was definitely something countless real gods would be jealous of. Then, Jian Wushuang walked toward Scripture Depository. In Scripture Depository. Elderly, Jian Wushuang looked at the deacon elderly who was guarding in Scripture Depository. Jian Wushuang? The deacon elderly took a glance at Jian Wushuang. If I'm not mistaken, you have yet to pass the 3rd floor of Star Tower. Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded. However, I have passed Illusionary Mind C's 19th floor. Hall Master Yuan said that I am qualified to cultivate the 2nd secret skill. I see. The deacon elderly understood and immediately pointed at the 4 secret rooms behind him. These 4 secret rooms, each room has a secret skill. You already cultivated the secret skill of Star Palace, so you can skip the 1st room on the left. Out of the remaining 3 secret rooms, you can choose whichever one you like. Jian Wushuang immediately walked before the 3 secret rooms. There were descriptions about the secret skill in the secret room at the entrance of each door. The 2nd secret room was Supreme Heaven that Ling Feibai cultivated. Supreme Heaven transformed one into demonic god and one's power would increase tremendously in a short period of time. The secret skill was of a high level. However, similarly, the cultivation threshold was terrifyingly high. Plus, Supreme Heaven was actually using an extremely unique power of bloodline. He himself was already a cultivator who possessed power of bloodline. Hence, he was destined to be unable to cultivate it. Supreme Heaven, although it is extremely fierce, I already possess ancient god blood. That means I have the prerequisites to cultivate it. Jian Wushuang sighed. Back when Ling Fengbai performed Supreme Heaven at the crucial moment, he had been envious of the terrifying power that he showed. Previously, he had made a decision. If he were to also have a chance to cultivate the secret skill. However, the opportunity was before him but he couldn't cultivate it. Jian Wushuang shook his head and walked towards the third secret room. In the third secret room was an extremely powerful secret skill of defense. It was called Xian Mie Golden Body. Secret skill of defense? Jian Wushuang was intrigued. His divine body was originally far stronger than cultivators of the same level and once cultivated secret skill of defense. However, it was Golden Image secret skill from Green Fire World. Although the Golden Image secret skill was quite decent and had provided great assistance to Jian Wushuang previously, Jian Wushuang grew more powerful and the Golden Image secret skill barely met his standards. Plus, the Xian Mie Golden Body that was before him, as one of the 4 secret skills in Lineage of Star, was definitely one of the top secret skills of defense. To Jian Wushuang, such a secret skill of defense was very useful. Jian Wushuang, when you wander in eternal chaotic world and want to gain a foothold in 10 cultivation sanctuaries and gradually come to prominence, the most important thing to do is to save your own life. As long as you're alive, everything is possible. The defense power is naturally crucial. I have heard of Xian Mie Golden Body before. It is really a powerful secret skill of defense. The secret skill is such that a universe god in the third heaven is barely qualified to cultivate this secret skill. Plus, once it's refined, even if one is only a beginner, his divine body of universe god in the third heaven would be enhanced tremendously. He could even be compared favorably to a real god. King of Venomous Worms said. Jian Wushuang was shocked. As long as a universe god in the third heaven became a beginner in Xian Mid Golden Body, his divine body could be compared favorably with a real god's. So impressive. It seems that Xian Mie Golden Body is really a great choice for me. However, there's no rush. I shall see what the last secret skill is before I make a decision. Jian Wushuang smiled and then came to the 4th secret room, which was also the last secret room. Jian Wushuang fixed his gaze on the description of the last secret skill before the 4th secret room. The last secret skill, it was called Secret Skill of Dragon Blood. What? Jian Wushuang was shocked when he saw the name itself. Then he continued to read the simple introduction about the secret skill. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's gaze became strange. The last secret skill among the 4 secret skill in Lineage of Star was the secret skill of Dragon Blood which he had cultivated long ago. Exactly the same. The secret skill of Dragon Blood was passed on to him by his master Xian Yi in order to protect his life during crucial times. The secret skill had saved him countless times. He also knew that the secret skill was extraordinary. Previously, merely by igniting his soul power, his speed would increase by 100 folds under the eruption of power. Then he became universe god and possessed divine power. Once his divine power ignited, his speed would be even faster, even more furious. But after he became a universe god, there was never such a life and death situation. Hence, he had yet to perform the technique with his all in eternal chaotic world. But Jian Wushuang never thought that the secret skill of Dragon Blood that his master taught him would be one of the 4 secret skills of Lineage of Star. The 4 secret skills in Lineage of Star are commonly entrusted to the person's memory directly and the person wouldn't be able to pass it on to someone else. In other words, the 4 secret skills should be leaked. However, your mysterious master possesses this secret skill and passed it on to you. Hee, so interesting, King of Venomous Worms laughed. Jian Wushuang had a strange look on his face. He didn't know how his master got the secret skill of Dragon Blood. However, the techniques that he performed were unfathomable. He could never figure him out. I never thought that I had actually already cultivated 2 of the secret skills in Lineage of Star. Jian Wushuang blinked. The secret skill of Star Palace and the secret skill of Dragon Blood were both secret skills in Lineage of Star. However, as the secret skill of Star Palace possessed the power of Star, the higher-ups in Lineage of Star could tell that he had cultivated it before. However, no one could tell that he could do the secret skill of Dragon Blood. Even experts like Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao, or even founder of Lineage of Star, if Jian Wushuang didn't proactively perform it, they wouldn't know that Jian Wushuang had cultivated the secret skill long ago. Hence, he was given the chance to visit Scripture Depository to choose the second secret skill. In actual fact, he should be choosing the third secret skill. Whatever, the secret skill of Dragon Blood was passed on to me by my master. I didn't get it from Lineage of Star. Jian Wushuang shrugged and went into the third secret room. Of the 4 secret skills, there were 2 that he had already cultivated and there was 1 that he couldn't cultivate. Hence, he was only left with 1 choice. The secret skill was Xian Nye Golden Body. Chapter 1426, Star Pavilion. Chapter 1426, Star Pavilion. In the secret room, Jian Wushuang stood alone. In front of him, there was a bead that gave out deep and serene light. Under the cover of Jian Wushuang's soul power, there was suddenly a wealth of information that surged towards him. The information was, shockingly, the cultivation method of Xian Nye Golden Body. It was imprinted in his head via inheritance. Xian Nye Golden Body, there was 3 volumes in total. The very first volume itself required one to be a universe god in the 3rd heaven to qualify for cultivation. After the first volume, the divine body of a universe god in the 3rd heaven could be compared favorably to a real god. The Xian Nye Golden Body is really strong, but the threshold of cultivation is extremely high. Just the first volume itself would require one to be a universe god in the 3rd heaven, and it would require the assistance of 9 types of bloodline powers in order to succeed. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. Although he was only a universe god in the 2nd heaven, as an inverse cultivator, regardless of if it was divine power or divine body, he could be compared favorably with a universe god in the 3rd heaven. He could just about reach the first requirement. However, for the second requirement, there were 9 types of bloodline power, and the higher level they were, the better. Jian Wushuang didn't have that then. Jian Wushuang, you only need to know the cultivation method. As for the 9 types of bloodline power, it's easy. The assistance of 9 types of bloodline power is nothing but some blood from a strong bloodline. Although you don't have them, they are sold in the market outside. They are not rare. From what I have estimated, as long as one can assemble 9 types of first-rate bloodline's blood, it will be more than enough to cultivate Xian Nye Golden Body, King of Venomous Worms said. In Eternal Chaotic World, there were quite a number of clans with unique bloodlines. These bloodline clans were divided into strong and weak too. The weakest was a 3rd-rate bloodline clan, followed by a 2nd-rate bloodline clan. The 1st-rate bloodline clan was an extremely ferocious and unruly clan in Eternal Chaotic World. Of course, like Jian Wushuang's ancient god bloodline, it was at the peak of Eternal Chaotic World. It already exceeded the 1st-rate bloodline clan's coverage. It belonged to the peak of the bloodline clan. I understand, Jian Wushuang nodded slowly. After he had memorized the 3 volumes of Xian Nye Universe God Cultivation Method, Jian Wushuang left Scripture Depository. In the Sword Star where Jian Wushuang was staying. Qiu Yu, how have you been over the 10 years that I've not been around? Jian Wushuang looked down. Mister, your performance during the battle 10 years ago shocked everyone. All the disciples in Lineage of Star revered you and no one dared to bully us maids and servants from Sword Star. Even when we had some conflict, the moment we brought up Sword Star, those servants in Lineage of Star or even the ordinary disciples would be courteous enough to not find trouble with us, Qiu Yu said. That's great, Jian Wushuang nodded faintly and asked, Qiu Yu, you're a universe god in the 3rd heaven. You have stayed in Starland for so many years and you definitely have rich experience. I need some blood of the 1st-rate bloodline. Do you know where I can find it? The blood of first-rate bloodline clan? Qiu Yu was stunned, then continued, there's Star Pavilion under the lineage of Star. It can be found all over Starland. They sell various kinds of rare treasures. It naturally includes blood of some bloodline clan. Master can pay them a visit. Star Pavilion? Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. Then, Jian Wushuang departed that very day. Jian Wushuang shot from the boundlessness towards the busiest city, Snake Soul City. Star Pavilion was located in Snake Soul City. It was located in a busy city that was full of experts. Jian Wushuang came before the Star Pavilion directly. This is Star Pavilion. It looks rather magnificent. Jian Wushuang looked at the huge, delicate pavilion that was about 9 floors high in astonishment. Although Star Pavilion could be compared favorably to Vientiane Tower, which was the top one in the 10 cultivation sanctuaries, it could be considered as the top store in Starland. There were many treasures collected here. In Star Pavilion, in a private, secret room, an elderly in purple robes stood before Jian Wushuang. The elderly in purple robes had an imposing aura. He was a real god. However, the real god behaved rather politely towards Jian Wushuang. Mr. Jian Wushuang, I wonder what I can do for you. The elderly in purple robes smiled. Although he was a real god, he was just an expert outside of lineage of Star. He was naturally polite when he came across the disciples from Star Palace, which was located in the core of lineage of Star. I need some blood of a first-rate bloodline clan, Jian Wushuang stated straightforwardly. There are many kinds of first-rate bloodline clans. I wonder which clans does the master want, and how much of them? The elderly in purple robe asked. As long as it's a first-rate bloodline clan, any will do. The clans don't matter. As for volume, please give me 3 drops of each, Jian Wushuang said. During the process of cultivating Xian Mie Golden Body, if everything were to go smoothly, it would only require a drop of blood from the 9 different bloodline clans. However, just in case, Jian Wushuang prepared 3 drops of each. Every drop of first-rate bloodline clan's blood costs 500,000 chaos gems. You wanted 9 types of bloodline, 3 drops of each type. It is a total of 27 drops. In total, it would require 13,500,000 chaos gems. The elderly in purple robe smiled. So expensive? Jian Wushuang was shocked. 13,500,000 chaos gem was much higher than many peak universe god in the third heaven's entire properties. Expensive. The elderly in purple robe smiled. Everyone knows that not only is the first-rate bloodline clan's blood rare, but it is also widely used. Hence, its value is naturally high. Plus, as you're a disciple from Star Palace, you are able to buy a drop of first-rate bloodline clan's blood at the price of 500,000. If it were to be anyone else, it would cost 1 million for a drop. Is that so? Jian Wushuang was lost for words. He waved and took out the Qian ring. I don't have so many chaos gems, and I can only offer these treasures instead. Can you see how much these treasures cost? The elderly in purple robes nodded. He took over the chaos gems and started calculating. Very quickly, there was a result. Mister, the treasures in this Qian ring are valued at a total of about 8 million chaos gems, the elderly in purple robe replied. Only worth this much? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. The Qian ring that he took out contained the items that he had kept from the years where he had killed others. It could be said that 99% of his treasures were in the Qian ring. He never thought that it would only be worth 8 million. It was still quite far away from the 13,500,000 chaos gems required. Chapter 1427 Auction. Chapter 1427 Auction. I have a few treasures. Take a look. Jian Wushuang took out another Qian ring. There were merely a few treasures in the Qian ring, and they were the most precious few that Jian Wushuang accumulated for all the years. Among them, there were 2 that he had got from Bei Xiu in Tianling Mystery Land. The elderly in purple robe briefly went through them and replied, Mister, these few treasures are valued at 5 million chaos gems. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. He had already taken out all his treasures that he had accumulated and he had only kept those that he could use. In the end, he was short of 500,000 chaos gem. Jian Wushuang, you're so dumb, King of Venomous Worms suddenly spoke. Those first-rate bloodline clans' blood essence are so precious and you own the royal ancient god's blood essence which is higher than those first-rate bloodline clans' blood. Wouldn't your blood be more valuable than the first-rate bloodline clan's blood? My blood essence? Jian Wushuang was stunned and then understood. He used his willpower and a drop of dark gold blood essence appeared in his palm. The drop of blood essence was the ancient god blood that he had accumulated for the past few years. Although he was an ancient god, it wasn't easy to accumulate ancient god blood essence. For the past few years, he had accumulated 3 drops in total. The 3 drops could be used at a crucial time. Then he took 1 drop out. Look, the drop of blood essence, how much is it worth? Jian Wushuang passed his ancient god blood essence over. The elderly in purple robe took the blood essence and examined carefully. At first, the elderly in purple robe was calm. Very soon, his facial expression was replaced with an unprecedented terror. This is ancient god blood essence. And among the ancient god clans, the highest bloodline of all, the royal ancient god's blood essence. The elderly in the purple robe was astonished and he couldn't help but look at Jian Wushuang. It is really the royal ancient god's blood essence. Could you see how much is it worth? Jian Wushuang smiled. The elderly in the purple robe took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in him when he replied, the drop of royal ancient god's blood essence, the Star Pavilion would normally have the price of 15 million chaos gems. 15 million? Jian Wushuang was overjoyed. In order to cultivate Xianmie Golden Body, he needed 9 types of bloodlines, at a total of 27 drops of blood essence. The value of 13,500,000 chaos gem couldn't even compare to his 1 single drop of blood essence. Mister, the drop of royal ancient god blood essence, if you were to sell to Star Pavilion directly, you can get 15 million chaos gem, but you could also opt to auction it out on the auction that is taking place 3 days later. You might be able to get more chaos gems then, the elderly in purple robe replied. Auction. Jian Wushuang was convinced. 3 days later, there will be a huge auction in Star Pavilion. Yes, the elderly in the purple robe nodded. Every once in a while, we Star Pavilion hold an auction. There will be a huge number of unique treasures that appear during the auction. At the same time, it will attract many experts. If you were to be interested, you can participate in the auction too. After all, the first-rate bloodline's blood essence that you requested will require a period of time to gather. As you have explained, I am now interested, Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. He had to wait for those first-rate bloodline clans' blood essence to arrive at Star Pavilion. He was free anyway, he might as well take a look at the auction. Then, put this drop of royal ancient god's blood essence up for auction. Most of the real gods stayed in the independent rooms on the 2nd floor. In one of the rooms, Jian Wushuang sat in silence. Tianshi, you don't have to take care of the auction affairs? Jian Wushuang looked at the elderly in purple robe next to him, Tianshi. No, Tianshi shook his head and smiled. To him, the auction's affairs were not as important as Jian Wushuang's. After all, Jian Wushuang was a disciple of Star Palace and he was a universe god in the 3rd heaven. He was destined to be the higher-ups in lineage of Star in the future, while Tianshi, who was only a real god outside the region. If he were to be on good terms with Jian Wushuang, it would be a great opportunity. Looking at Tianshi refusing, Jian Wushuang lifted his eyebrows but didn't push it. The auction below had started long ago. There were already 100 over treasures sold. Among the hundreds of treasures auctioned, there were some of high value and even treasures that would attract real gods. However, Jian Wushuang had yet to see any that were useful to him. Mister, soon it will be the royal ancient god's blood essence, Tianshi said. Jian Wushuang looked and he began to look forward to it. Very soon, someone took the jade bottle up. The lady in red robe who was the host of the auction shouted, "Everyone, the treasure up for auction next value could be in the top 10 for this auction, and as for its rarity, it is definitely top. The treasure, if you were to miss it, I dare say that you might not have a chance to see it again." The lady in the red robe spoke, and there was suddenly a commotion at the auction. The cultivators in the auction, including those real gods who had come for the auction, were excited. The lady in the red robe didn't blab further but quickly took out the dark gold blood essence from the jade bottle. The moment the drop of dark gold blood essence revealed itself, the universe gods who didn't know what was going on were calm in the open area. However, the real gods in the independent rooms on the second floor were roaring from the bottom of their hearts. That is ancient gods' blood essence. It is ancient gods' blood essence, and it is the top clan among ancient gods. The highest royal ancient god's blood essence. Oh my, the royal ancient god's blood essence is here in this auction? It's a pity that the drop of royal ancient god's blood essence power isn't too strong. If I'm not mistaken, its owner should only be a 5-starred ancient god but yet to pass God's test to become a 6-starred ancient god. Otherwise, the drop of royal ancient god's blood essence would be really impressive. I reckon many powerful real gods would be tempted. Even though it is only the blood essence of a 5-starred royal ancient god, it is still very rare. Chapter 1428, The Painting of Understanding Sword via Reincarnation. Chapter 1428, The Painting of Understanding Sword via Reincarnation. There were many gasps from the room. They were obviously preparing to bid. The lady in the red robe started the auction for the blood of a royal ancient god. The base price of the auction was already 10 million chaos gems. The base price itself was 10 million chaos gems. Isn't it too high? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows and said, "Mister, you belittled the rarity of the blood of royal ancient god. For such precious blood, even if the base price was 20 million, there would be people bidding for it, let alone the base price of 10 million. If there were to be someone who needed such blood, he would buy it no matter how high the price." Tianshi smiled. As expected, not long after the lady in the red robe had announced the base price, there were people bidding. 12 million chaos gem. 13 million. 15 million. Very soon, it exceeded the price that Star Pavilion offered and it continued to soar. In the end, there was a real god in the private room on the second floor who bought the drop of royal ancient god blood for the price of 23 million chaos gems. 23 million chaos gems. Jian Wushuang's eyes were beaming with joy. From what he knew, an ordinary real god's entire property was about 40 million chaos gems. 23 million chaos gems were already half of a real god's entire property. It's a pity that it isn't easy to accumulate ancient god blood. I only accumulated 3 drops over such a long period of time. If it were easy, I would like to get a few more drops to auction off. Jian Wushuang smiled. Then, the auction continued. Jian Wushuang glanced at the treasures that were auctioned but almost nobody made any offer. 2 days later. The next treasure that is up for auction is extremely unique. In terms of value, at this auction, it could be in the top 3. The lady in the red robe spoke and every cultivator at the auction suddenly looked over. The auction in Star Pavilion didn't tend to save the best for last. Those previous treasures appeared randomly as they wanted. The treasure that was going to be up for auction then was obviously one of the most precious treasures in the auction. The lady in red robe took out the treasures. It was a scroll painting. It had yet to be opened but it had a terrifying sword intention that dispersed. Huh! Jian Wushuang, who was in the private room, saw the scroll painting and he immediately squinted. He was interested in any treasure that was related to sword principle. The scroll painting was obviously related to sword principle. The lady in the red robe continued to speak. Everyone, as you're wandering in Starland, I believe that there should be many of you who have heard of a real god named Ju-He. Real god Ju-He? Real god Ju-He who fell 6 million years ago. Hearing real god Ju-He's name, many real gods in the private rooms revealed a surprised look. Real god Ju-He? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. He had just got to Starland not long ago, so he naturally had never heard of real God Juhi. Then Tianshi by his side spoke. Real God Ju, he was once the real God experts on the peak of Starland. His fame was not only in Starland but throughout the entire 10 cultivation sanctuaries. When he was still alive, he occupied a space in the real God ranking list. Real God ranking? Jian Wushuang moved. He didn't know much about real gods. He never knew how to differentiate the power between real gods. But he knew about the real God ranking list. On the real God ranking list was gathered a bunch of top real gods in 10 cultivation sanctuaries. These real gods possessed a fighting power that could massacre a bunch of real gods easily. For example, Lei Chao from Lineage of Star was an expert on real God ranking list. And because of Lei Chao's strong power and his high position in Lineage of Star, he could even call Hall Master Yuan by his name. The other deacon elderlies in Lineage of Star would greet Hall Master Yuan politely. Noticing the commotion at the auction, the lady in the red robe smiled faintly. She immediately continued, the scroll painting for auction was the painting of understanding sword via reincarnation that the real God expert formed with his understanding towards reincarnation doctrine and his terrifying sword principle. The entire auction was in silence. The next moment, the crowd burst into an uproar. Swoosh! Jian Wushuang, who was in private, stood up directly. There was a light that fixed on the scroll painting below. The painting of understanding sword via reincarnation. To flawlessly merge reincarnation doctrine with sword principle? This? Jian Wushuang looked dumbfounded. He had just become a beginner in reincarnation doctrine and mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation with the aid of real God Hall. Hence, it was a true sword principle cultivator and he was good at sword principle. It was because of the battle to become a disciple of Star Palace previously, and due to the press of time, even if he improved tremendously in sword principle, it would be very difficult for him to safeguard his position as a disciple of Star Palace. Hence, he had focused on soul attack for the past years. Regardless, Jian Wushuang had a swordsman living in him. He was a born swordsman. Regardless of the improvement on his soul attack, he was still best at sword principle. Especially then, he had just become a beginner in reincarnation doctrine and mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation. Then what he needed the most was to merge his sword principle and the power of reincarnation flawlessly, so that he could create an even stronger and more impressive unique skill. In turn, his understanding of sword principle increased tremendously. It was the most pressing matter for him. He had originally planned to cultivate the first volume of Shuemye Golden Body, then spend the rest of the time improving his swordsmanship. Who would ever have thought that the painting of understanding sword via reincarnation, which merged reincarnation doctrine with sword principle, would appear when he needed it the most? The painting of understanding sword via reincarnation was simply tailor-made for him. Jian Wushuang, you were just a universe god in the first heaven previously. You were in too low of a realm and you were restricted naturally. To be able to create an advanced rank 3 unique skill was already your limit. But now that you have broken through your realm and mastered a slight bit of power of reincarnation, it means that you have removed your shackles. Your swordsmanship is in an eruption period. The eruption period is extremely hard to come by. If you were to get the aid of the painting of understanding sword via reincarnation, you would prove to be even more amazing. So, for your power, get the painting of understanding sword via reincarnation at any cost. King of Venomous Worm's voice rang in his head. I understand. Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. He squinted his eyes as he held his fists tight. He knew how much help the painting of understanding sword via reincarnation would be to him. He couldn't miss such a treasure. That you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.